today. This episode, I was going to split this up into multiple episodes to kind of do throughout the week. And then I looked at how kind of jam-packed our current week is going to be with some pretty big guests. And I love taking that content and, of course, bringing it to the audio-only podcast. I want to say a big-ass thank you to all of you that have listened, that have reviewed the show, that have shared the show. I saw recently the show is in the top 5 for music commentary. I still find that funny that we're still in the music category. But we're in the top 50 on Apple Podcasts for music shows in general. So that's pretty damn cool. So thank you guys. We're going to keep putting out the best content that we possibly can. That being said, this show here is from our free show. So sometimes we've been getting good and cutting the free show about an hour and a half, right? The whole purpose of the free show is that we do not go to the patron bonus half. You just get the straight conversation. It does get a little silly, very serious. And this show we did with a young person that we actually really like, Stefan Bertram Lee. If you remember, if you're a listener for a little bit, about 3 months ago, he came on the show, and there's a movie being made about him. He was, typical young person online, memeing his way to freedom and liberation. Kind of got tired of the bullshit fuckery of onlineness and literally said fuck it and went to Rojava to go fight with the PKK. No, wait, I said that wrong. But he did go fight with the Kurds in Rojava. And that's pretty cool to say, fuck it. I'm going to go do something. So he is back in his native UK going to grad school. And he is working on his thesis, which is on the idea of privilege. And when he first came on the show, the whole thing was we were going to talk about his time and just the conflict that's going on over there. That not a lot of, you don't get a lot of it in American press. And being that me, Jean Bajlan, is part Kurdish, we actually get to, much like Pascal, constantly dissecting Haiti and the Caribbean. We get a different perspective, and we like to do shows about those things because it's very personal for us. So when he was on the show, he was telling us about this thesis, and we were off air talking more about the privilege conversation than we were about his actual reason for being on the show initially. So we decided we were going to have him back. And, we worked it out. We have him back. It was a great first about hour and a half. Around the same time, we were trying to fit another gentleman for another day who actually had some inside baseball on the politics of Ohio District 11. This man is a civil rights lawyer, Peter Patakas, a civil rights attorney in Ohio. And he actually had, I believe, a lawsuit that was settled out with Chantel Brown. So the first half of the show is privileged discourse, and the second half of the show is kind of about the inner workings of the political machine in Ohio and what led to Nina Turner's loss. And, you know, you guys can't see it, but someone had got in the chat, and I had to respond. They were like, Nina Turner ran a centrist campaign, which was kind of an amazing comment to me, because I was like, then why would a literal center-right party do everything they could to stop her, to literally neutralize that campaign? And the person didn't really have much to say back other than I called them a troll. I did not call that person a troll. I did call them asinine because I thought that comment was very, very silly. And one thing we try to do is eliminate this black on black progressive hate that can emanate from the Twitter sphere into our show. But it was a great show. I hope you guys enjoy it. Thank you once again for all of your support. Wherever you're listening to this show, there are links in the description to Patreon, patreon.com/BitterLakePresents. If you want to watch the show live, go to YouTube. It's the best way. YouTube.com/this is Revolution Podcast. That's my cue. And I am out.
Good morning, everyone. Busy day we have today. Full damn house we got today. Surprise guest that even the panel doesn't know that's showing up today. Busy day. We have a returning guest today. Actually, pretty excited to have this young man back. So let me just start introducing. And also thank you guys for showing up for the free show. My homie, my dog that's going lightweight viral from a clip of him on the Majority Report. You may know him as the one that is always ready to mow the bourgeoisie. I know him. He's my best Haitian friend. He is the Pascal.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles. And why is that music still on?
Because it's on. Damn, why are you so difficult? Look here, Grandpa. We're being difficult. Enjoy the chill music for the morning.
It's not soothing.
Well, look, you know what sucks? They pick it. It's hella random.
That's the problem. It's not stupid.
I would rather play my own, but it's very frustrating. And coming in from the epicenter of the resurgence of COVID, Mean Gene Bajlan.
Good morning, Jason. Good morning, Pascal. I hope you're all in wonderful form. I'm super excited about today's show. And I just want to say, I like the music. It's relaxing and calming. Just gonna
no matter what genre you click that they have, it's all like elevator music, but sometimes it's better than others, but I can't. It's a weird thing where no matter what you click, it'll never be the same thing again. So it's some weird, what do you call it? Algorithm created.
Algorithm loop.
Yeah, it's like music by algorithm, which is odd to me. But before we bring in our guest, because the show is growing so much, there's people that may not have seen these older episodes. He was last here with us. Was it about a month ago, guys?
Maybe a little less, but it seems like time is flying.
It was 2 months. They were here. I think it was 2.5 months ago.
No way.
It wasn't that long.
Yeah, it was 2.5 months ago. You know, I'm going to go check when they were last on the show.
Well, 2.5 months ago, I believe Eugene, because you booked the show initially. 2.5 months ago, Gene, actually a little bit longer because of course we had time to prep for the show, had pitched us this person that had was perpetually online and got tired of the online discourse and said, "Fuck this! I'm actually going to go do something," and literally went to go fight in Rojava. So here is a clip of that original show.
Syrian Civil War has been one of the bloodiest civil wars of the decade, leaving hundreds of thousands of dead and millions displaced. The conflict, which originated in a rebellion against Syrian dictator Bashar Assad, has since spiraled into a seemingly endless cycle of violence, drawing in a number of international players in from Turkey, Iran, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Great Britain, and the United States. The war is often portrayed as being between a ruthless secular dictatorship and an opposition that has, over the years, come to be dominated by the most brutal and hardline Islamist groups, most notably ISIS. However, in Syria's predominantly Kurdish-inhabited northeast, known locally as Rojava, a different political force emerged, the YPG, a libertarian socialist militia that came to prominence in the context of the fight against ISIS. Although heavily criticized by elements of the Western left for its military alliance with the United States, the organization also attracted support from many anarchists and socialists who went to fight alongside the Kurds. This week on This Is Revolution, we speak to one such individual, Stefan Bertram Lee, about what inspired them to join the Kurds and what they found when they arrived in Rojava. This is Revolution.
So let's bring in our guest who had many nicknames that day during the show because the images that they were calling him, was it Skinny Ass Thor? What was another name they had for him? Oh, hold on. I muted Eugene. Talk now.
Sorry, it was June the 12th when he came on, when they came on. June the 12th. So that's
let's bring in Skinny Ass Thor. Coming all the way live from a bunker somewhere in the UK. Stefan Bertram Lee.
Yeah, I mean, after Jason's gloss about, going going offline and going out in the world to actually try and do something. I tried that, then I was like, oh, it's a bit too much, and I've decided to become an academic instead. Say something about that.
It's the synthesis. You've got like the dialectic there, you know.
Yeah.
Online
Like
all the time.
A very cut price, like Scholar Warrior.
Exactly.
Scholar Warrior. I like that one.
The gold watch.
Scholar active. Scholar Warrior.
We're gonna have to call him we're gonna have to call them Sheikh Stefan. You know,
Scholar Warrior. Scholar Mujahideen Warrior.
Yeah, Scholar Mujahideen Warrior.
So when he's a professor, he'll have a fucking big ass Rambo knife for no reason, just to have it so people can know, like, this is what I do, Scholar Warrior. Word.
Giant pen, like the guy in
like Castillo.
Castillo, he's gonna like Stefan's gonna like beat people down with his that giant pen.
Constantly talking about his days on the battlefield. Oh man, some days were hotter than other days on the battlefield.
Of the pen.
Of education.
Did they when you were at school, Stefan, did they have the Pen 15 club?
Oh, we had Penn Island.
Oh, you had Penn Island. We had Pen 15 where it was basically where you would go up to someone and say, "Hey, do you want to be in the Pen 15 club?" And they go, "Yeah, I want to be in the Pen 15." And you write Pen 15 on them, which looks like penis.
Yeah.
No, we did the you've dropped your gay card.
Oh, you've dropped your gay card.
Actually, when I said that, Jason looked down, so
maybe he did.
Since we're on a schedule, let's get to the actual topic of hand. Stefan, who, as Jason had told you in our last episode when we had him on, is went to fight in the Rojava area of Syria with the YPG. But one thing we learned when we had him on the show is that he's working on a dissertation upon which the subject is privilege discourse. Now, for our audience who may not be familiar with what privilege discourse is, it's basically a position that argues that your social or racial positionality gives you a certain inherent privilege that gives you advantages to others who don't have that same positionality. So what we're going to investigate for those of us who are on the material left, who find that one of the problems with privilege discourse is that it neutralizes the understanding of class. For example, hold on. Yes, there's a perfect argument we're going to talk about. Why is a working class Latino woman who lives in the Bronx or a working class white woman who lives in the Bronx considered to have white privilege compared to Oprah Winfrey, who's a billionaire? So we're going to interrogate how privilege discourse actually may obscure the ability to look at more materialist causes for human suffering. So the first question I want to ask Stefan is, can you connect us to the origins of where privilege discourse as a phenomenon comes from? Academia, activist circles, postmodernism? What is the actual context in which this thinking is born?
So there's two main texts which get referenced all the time in kind of contemporary popular literature and academic literature. Obviously, people that write tweets they don't reference, but this is probably where they got it from. One is this article written in, I think, about 1972 called White Blind Spot. White Blind Spot is like a new left text. It's quite mad, like very aggressive, very crazy style that they had in these early 70s. And as you might tell from the title White Blind Spot, it's basically saying that kind of the revolutionary upsurge of the late 60s and the early 70s failed because white revolutionaries had like a so-called white blind spot where they weren't able to see that kind of the inequality or whatever that was going on in America was primarily or very importantly racially based or whatever. And he introduced this term of white skin privilege. Skins got dropped in the decade since because we like short little terms that people have. And there's very interesting stuff in there that we can talk about later. But one especially thing that's come on since then from that text is kind of the idea of privilege. It doesn't matter how small a difference is, it's still privilege. In that text, the guy says, you know, if there's like some kind of like flood thing or whatever, and a white family get like an extra bag of Red Cross rice compared to a black family, that's privilege. So even if people are in this horrible, horrible, horrible condition where they have nothing, if they get slightly more than someone else, that's still privilege. And the other text, a more boring one, is Invisible Knapsack, which is kind of a listicle before there were listicles. It was published in 1989. It's by this white woman academic who'd set out to write kind of an essay on kind of the ways her and her male colleagues are different, like all the ways in which her male colleagues have advantages over her. So she was going to write this big long list, but then she was like, oh, wait, actually, comparing my position to my black academic colleagues, actually, I should be the one writing a big long list of all the advantages I've got. And this one, yeah, it has this kind of, this strange thing of, again, as with the other one, it was listing these very kind of minor things or like tiny things or kind of like things based on just like small levels of kind of interpersonal discourse. Not anything grand, nothing important, because obviously in the end, all these people are academics, are all quite well off, especially kind of back then, before like the proletarianization of academics that's happened in the past 30 years. These are all people that were well off, but talking about kind of these small differences that they have between her, and then kind of saying that kind of, and it's very this obvious thing of kind of like academic life generalized to everyone else, as if by writing this list about the differences between her and other academics, she could fully understand the conditions of kind of the racial structure of the United States.
So what's fascinating here is that this discourse does not start in movement circles. It does not start by activists, left or right. It doesn't start in the civil rights movement. It doesn't even start with black or brown people. It starts with white elite academics who are reacting to what they feel are the failings of the new left in the 1960s. So this discourse isn't even initiated by quote unquote people of color or black or brown people who are trying to challenge race, class, and capitalism, or concepts that some people would call quote unquote white supremacy. I'm not particularly a fan of using that term because I don't believe there's anything supreme about white people, but we can get into that at another time. But is there a correlation between the popularity of this privileged discourse that you say starts with a few academics in the early 70s and the phenomenon which we had a show on recently called Post-Modernism? To contextualize, and Gene, I'd like you to interject if I get my description of Post-Modernism wrong here. Postmodernism is basically an ideological posture that comes into academia in the 80s that posits the belief that it is not structures like capitalism and the state or social institutions that govern the ways in which people live or are oppressed, but it is your individual personality and personal situation as a person that dictates how exactly you interact with phenomenon around you. Gene, do you think that's a fair way of saying, or do you want to intersect with a more clear analysis?
I mean, in terms of postmodernism, I think the term is actually very difficult to nail down. I certainly think that there is one aspect of postmodernist discourse is, as you say, Pascal, a move away from structure to the analysis of culture and discourse, and also almost a kind of pessimism about, what we might think of as grand narratives, like the Marxist grand narrative, the liberal grand narrative. So a kind of almost pathological skepticism. So I think there's a whole number of things, because and perhaps Stefan could correct me with if I'm wrong here. With a lot of the privileged discourse, there's a lot of talk about reflecting on the privilege, but there never ever seems to be a solution. So it kind of fits into a postmodern malaise and confusion that exists. Whereas as a Marxist you would say, let's annihilate the material structures that maintain racial difference in the United States. The kind of privilege discourse sort of takes us away from concrete material actions to like endless navel gazing and going to like it's almost like prayer. I was discussing this with somebody I know here. I was like, on one hand, you go to a diversity training to get absolution for your inherent racism that you can do nothing about. And, Ibrahim Kendi, the high priest of wokeness, will give you an indulgence for $50. That's just the react. You'll go to Ibrahim Kendi, you'll pay him some money, and you'll get 15 minutes of reprieve from white guilt. So I think there's something very postmodern because there never seems to be a solution to the problems of racism because, postmodernism kind of has this, skepticism that there is any notion that we can ever progress or,
So the ultimate question, Stefan, is there a correlation with the preeminence of privileged discourse and the rise of postmodernism, which was an intentional move away from Marxist dialectical materialism and concepts of class and challenging capitalism? Is there a correlation?
Before you answer that, Stefan, I'm going to ask you and Pascal, before you answer that, did either one of you read Theodore Allen or Noel Ignat?
Yes, I'm familiar with Theodore Allen's book.
White Blind Spot, which I mentioned before, is by those two.
So someone's saying that if you don't mention those, then you don't know what you're talking about. So you
Theodore Allen, mentioned the white race.
I prefer White Blind Spot. So.
Well, there you go. Person in the chat that's very upset that white.
We just started, man. I mean, good grief.
Well, you know how people are. They're like, if you don't talk about this, then you're not talking about anything because I hate white people.
That was literally the first article he mentioned.
Yeah.
Theodore Allen wrote the book "The Invention of the White Race."
Well, speaking of
and while they weren't academics at the time, they did go on to become academics. So again, but
Stefan, if you can address the issue of
the postmodernism thing, I think I'm like Jen. I'm not sure exactly what's going on with kind of postmodernism. It's really a thing, but certainly privilege is come about because of a collapse of kind of the materialist left. Not necessarily because there's some kind of conspiratorial like postmodernist movement, which like wants everything to be relative. But because we've lost our way, kind of basically, we're kind of lost in the world. We don't have any grand narratives. We don't have any grand solutions. We don't have, these plans. We don't have anything like the Soviet Union to look at, even if, maybe we think the Soviet Union was always bad or whatever. But even there's nothing. There's like, okay, I guess some people are like freaks for China, but like, who cares? So yeah, we're kind of just lost in this thing. And as Jen was saying, in this kind of world, these ideas of kind of things which focus back onto the self, to talk about the person, to talk about what's going on there, to think about yourself internally and think about yourself as an individual and your like position in a social hierarchy, as opposed to kind of thinking about the social hierarchy itself, become popular. So we can kind of try and force it all into this postmodernism thing, but I think actually that kind of gives it too much credit, because it kind of thinks of all these kind of movements that we have going on as kind of one coherent thing that we could like aim kind of like Marxism back towards. But the actual fact is that these people all kind of disagree with each other. Like what I found out with doing all this privilege research is there's lots of people that we would call woke that don't want to talk about privilege. They want to talk about other stuff. Like Pascal was talking about white supremacy. I read like an essay by like an academic article by a very woke person or whatever, who rejects talking about privilege, not because they're kind of a Marxist or whatever, but because they think compared to white supremacy, like white privilege is just pussying around,
Interesting. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you also is that is it correct that one of the arguments of the privileged discourse advocates is that this privilege is permanent, endemic cannot be changed. And if that is the case, then what exactly is the motivation to even fight for justice? Which is one of the problems I have with people who say things like, racism is endemic, it'll never end, it won't stop. Then why don't you just put shackles on your neck and go work in a plantation because you don't think it can be fought?
Yeah. I think it's like sorry, I've just mind blanked. It was Jen was saying, I think it's not less like in the text that you find like kind of an explicit rejection of solutions. It's rather that you just don't really find anything at all. It's kind of like the only thing that you'll see is kind of this stuff about internal reflection or personal stuff. But I don't think the people that write this stuff are kind of saying like this is the 100% way out. I think they just don't really. There's not really a big prominent idea. There's like kind of a uniting theme of what privilege is, and these people can all agree on that. But what you do about it, I don't think there's a clear solution. Like there's not people really talking about like policies and stuff. That's one thing that's actually different with Kendi, for instance. He doesn't talk about privilege, and in his writings, he talks about policies. These policies might be really bad, but he does talk about policies. While people that talk about privilege, you don't really see this stuff because I don't think it's a discourse that's kind of set up in that way. It is, I think, this kind of thing of I think the best book, like for kind of showing the thing of privilege is like this white fragility book, which I guess it does have some vague things of like, oh, people should go to diversity training, but it's kind of this story about this white woman wandering about America being told to be fuck off by working class people, kind of like crying about it and saying this has something to do with racism.
You think that's what her book was about?
White fragility, yeah. I mean, it's just a story about an annoying woman getting told to be fucked off. A white woman, an annoying white woman, and saying this shows how racist America is.
But isn't that? I mean, obviously there's going to be people who are, genuinely buy into the kind of privileged discourse you're talking about, right? But also it strikes me do you think, like, especially in the case of white fragility, is that it is a marketable ideology that can comfortably fit in the neoliberal moment? Like these people are doing they're doing diversity trainings and creating a whole industry of diversity training by utilizing this privileged discourse. So privileged discourse is not simply, its popularity has a material basis because now you have all these interest groups. I was speaking to an activist, a friend of the show that Jason knows as well, and he was talking about how a lot of these activists he knew like 10, 15 years ago, now they're totally bought into the corporate world, are doing diversity training. And if you ask them, what is your metric for success, they get mad at you, right?
Ooh. Because honestly, what is the metric for success? I'm sure everyone in the chat and everybody here on the show has had a diversity training at their job or school, and the talks never go anywhere. The videos you have to watch never have any sort of solutions in them. They are the most useless thing I've ever been around. And that was one of the last conversations I had at that job.
Well, let's to refer to our good friend of show, two-time guest Paul McComb, who has very significant, trenchant critiques of all of this type of discourse. He would argue that this stuff is fundamentally liberal and simply is arguing for equality of opportunity, distribution, and recognition. Now, you would ask, well, what's wrong with equality of opportunity, distribution, and recognition? Well, the problem is, if you have a capitalist society and you realize that capitalism is based on exploiting economic hierarchies, you also realize that increasing economic distribution and access to the hierarchy simply means that if only 5% of the population owns all the resources and everyone else is a slave, as long as we have 14% of that 5% elite that are black, and everyone else who is a black, white, or otherwise are slaves, then we are fine. In other words, when you are asking for liberal solutions like equality of opportunity, distribution, and recognition in a system of capitalist hierarchy, it does not address the fact that capitalism requires wealth inequality and maximization of the numbers of people that are relegated to the reserve army of labor. So even though in American capitalism, the majority of the system demands that black people are disproportionately relegated to the reserve army of labor, what we have to realize is, though, still the larger number of people who are poor are white. That's why the key is you have to have the psychological projection that black people are the only people who are poor, because if America realized that there are more poor white people than blacks, the system doesn't work because those white people will rebel. And that's why you have to have, in a racialized capitalist society, that the reserve army of labor disproportionately will affect blacks, but the majority of the people in the reserve army of labor are actually white. And if you use this kind of privileged discourse, which ultimately only asks for equality of opportunity, distribution, and recognition, all you're going to do is diversify the people at the top and just increase everyone, regardless of race or color, who is in the reserve army of labor.
Yeah, I think the fundamental thing is kind of, if we talk about something like racial income inequality, is our problem kind of that white people are earning too much, or is our problem that black people aren't earning enough? If you really think the problem is that white people are earning too much, then yeah, talk about privilege. But if your problem is that black people aren't earning enough, you should be talking about discrimination. Because the thing is, most of the things that we talk about, we call privilege, are actually something that we all deserve, we all should have. They're basic human rights. Like if we talk about police violence, and we'd say that in America, white people have like a privilege as regarding police violence, what that sounds like is we should be getting rid of the advantage that they have, as in they should be getting brutalized as much as black people do. And you can almost hear people explicitly saying this. Like when the January 6th events were happening, you had people saying, like, basically making it out as if these protesters were getting attacked violently as BLM were, then that would be justice. As if it's not that both of these groups shouldn't be violently murdered by the police, you know?
That's an excellent point. And I think I just want to sort of add on to that and get Stefan's thoughts on this. Do you think this discourse also affects the kind of defund and abolish the police discourse? Because, you know, a lot of the people who are advocate, not everybody, I don't want to say everybody, but a lot of the people who advocate, like, let's move away from carceral solutions to crime and things like that, and let's defund the police, at the same time want the state to impose the maximum kind of measures upon police who commit crimes. And I'm not defending police who commit crimes or saying that they shouldn't be punished or they should be punished and how they should be punished. But I do see that that's a kind of contradiction in the discourse. What are your thoughts on that, Stefan? Is that the kind of dynamic you're thinking of?
I don't know exactly if it's that related to privilege, but it does feel like there's a lot of discourse in the United States where basically all sides want to kind of capture the state in order to do like violence to people they think is bad. But that's kind of it, because of kind of the collapse. Like the US never even had social democracy. So in the collapse of kind of like what was at some point like a vaguely working social liberal state, the last thing you have left is kind of these things that can do violence. You've got the intelligence agencies, you've got the police, you've got the military. And all people can really, the limit of kind of normal political imagination is, you know, how can I capture the state to do violence against the bad people, you know? So yeah, like you'll hear from very like similar liberals kind of like defund the police, but we need to set up like a special intelligence service to like focus on domestic terrorism. So it's almost like, you know, defund the police, fund the CIA.
It's funny that when Derek Chauvin recently got sentenced, the first thing that you saw among leftist discourse was like, oh, he didn't get enough time.
Yeah, and like it's obviously like I think Derek Chauvin should be in prison forever, but I don't think we should abolish prisons. Like,
I want to address something that someone's talking about, and I agree with you. Talking about privilege, when reality is you're talking about things that everyone should have, actually mitigates talking about discrimination, because all you're saying is that these white people have these things that they always have. But if you believe that it's a permanent reality of being white, then you shouldn't even believe in discrimination because you think physics makes it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I ran the numbers, and kind of popular literature, which talks about privilege a lot, doesn't talk about discrimination a lot, like the literal word. And the same goes the other way. So really, it does seem like these are kind of like opposing words. That if you talk about one, you don't talk about the other. And this affects how your discourse works.
I want to address something someone said in the chat mentioning about racism and the obsession with talking about racism as opposed to capitalism or economic exploitation. And I've used this metaphor before. If in America we can snap our fingers and racism would disappear, meaning that no white people actually discriminate, no one of any color or ethnic group discriminated based on the color of your skin. That alone. No one discriminated based on your color of your skin. Would that stop black people from being disproportionately poor? I'm asking.
Oh, it wasn't rhetorical?
No, I mean, it's obviously the thing that kind of, it also has this contradictory thing where how can privilege kind of work with kind of structural racism? If we have this idea that most things are kind of how inequality works is kind of on structural basis, not on the basis of how people feel about things, but on the basis of kind of like kind of government policies and generations of difference and whatever, then why do we have this discourse which is popular, which is all about kind of talking about like how we personally experience the world, how we should reflect upon ourselves and all this kind of stuff. Privilege is not just kind of, I find it strange, not because, you know, as Marxists, as materialists, we should reject it, but I think it's a bad fit even with kind of within these social justice discourses. Like we hear a lot about kind of like standpoint stuff where like it's all about kind of talking about from the perspective of the oppressed and all this kind of stuff. And that we've heard enough about white people and we need to hear about kind of black experiences and all this kind of stuff. White privilege discourse doesn't do that. Privilege discourse is all about talking about the oppressed and what's going on in their lives and how they feel about things. So I find it very strange how white privilege and privilege has become this really popular idea because it doesn't fit into kind of like a materialist analysis, but it also doesn't fit, I think, quite very well into most social justice kind of woke discourses either.
What's fascinating about this is that the one consistent thing we have in terms of our conversation about these phenomenon, whether it's hyper concentration of racism, hyper concentration on privileged discourse, or hyper concentration of all of this liberal wokeness, even if we do what the people ask, black people are still at the bottom of the barrel. You know why? You know what we're demonstrating? Because if you do not challenge capitalism, it does nothing for black oppression. Nothing.
So being an ally.
That is why the black chattering class, the black political class, and the American ruling class do not want black people to talk about socialism or challenging capitalism because they realize that that is the key linchpin to keeping the system of oppression going, is the black people believing that capitalism works for them.
But even if kind of, you know, even if we kind of clicked our fingers or we fired the privilege gun and we led to a circumstance where actually black people were proportionally poor in America, that would still suck. That would still be terrible. Like, even at the very, very best, even if it did exactly what it did and ended racial inequality in these terms, because of the structure of America, you'd still have millions of black people in quite horrible kind of extreme poverty.
Can I ask, so we've been talking about like white privilege. Can I also, can I kind of pivot a little bit to talking about the discourse of male privilege? And, what is that? What's the relationship to the kind of racial version of that question? And, is the discourse on male privilege exactly the same? And, how does that function?
Well, the interesting thing is it's basically kind of dead. Looking at contemporary books, basically I didn't expect this going in. I thought, like you, Jen, that there would be kind of quite a lot on male privilege, because there was kind of 7 years ago, in like 2013, 2014, this kind of time, on kind of this idea of male privilege. And it seems like, you can kind of do intersectionality with kind of privilege. But in reading books published in the last few years, even when they're on gender, they only talk about privilege when it comes to race. So you'll have a book about, say, that's 90% about feminism. It's like privilege, like no privilege at all. And then we get to the racial bit and it's privilege, privilege, privilege. So it feels like privilege discourse has been really captured by like a very certain kind of racial inequality. So unfortunately, like I can't really say about how.
That's a fascinating development in and of itself. And kind of a second question I wanted to ask is, Pascal opened up with the question about postmodernism, and I think the relationship of this privileged discourse to postmodernism. And I kind of hinted at it, and I wanted to kind of like nail you down on this and see what your thoughts were. In what sense is privilege less the ideology or a variety of ideology of postmodernism, but rather a corollary to the idea of neoliberalism and the it's an ideological construct that works very well in the neoliberal political order. And of course, within neoliberal political order, you have kind of racist republicanism, but then you have a counterpoint to that, which is this discourse of privilege and this sort of getting people of color to buy into the capitalist order through making the promise that privilege can be dealt with in some way that allows an element of the black population to benefit from neoliberalism.
Can I make a quick interjection, if you don't mind? Well, Gene talking about, this is very important, Gene, and thank you for bringing this up. The value of privileged discourse, woke discourse, and all of the contemporary discourse to neoliberalism. Let's try to define neoliberalism for the audience. And if you disagree with my definition, either one of you, I'm welcome to correction. Neoliberalism for me is basically a fancy word for privatization. Basically, you take away state services, state functionality, and government services, and you render them to private corporations, marketize those functions while you still pay taxes, and the private sector controls those functions. And because the private sector controls those functions and it's not the state, they have no fiduciary responsibility in connection to the body politic. And because it's a private sector as opposed to the state, they can use whatever kind of austerity tactics, whether it's cutting services or cutting the quality of services that work within the paradigm of capitalist budgeting to harm the people who need those services. Why does all of this kind of privileged discourse, wokeness studies work for neoliberalism? Since we realize that the state, as not only a distributor of resources, but also an employer, has to be more egalitarian. Why? Because the state, after the civil rights movement and the inclusion of the civil rights movement, has a legal, constitutional, and state requirement of accessing equal opportunity and equalizing the distribution of goods and services more adeptly than the private sector. So if neoliberalism is about pushing the privatization of everything, when you use this kind of woke discourse that doesn't tell you that the need to equalize distribution of resources through the state is important, and it tells you that it's your personal treatment that's the problem, it will make you feel like there's no problem with neoliberalism because you don't need the state, and you look at the state as the center of your oppression. That's why this quote-unquote reparations discourse is neoliberal. Why? Because it says the U.S. federal government did this to us. You don't think the private sector worked in tandem with the federal government to do this to you? What was more damaging? The state jobs that you couldn't work at anyway, or the private companies that stopped you from eating at diners, going to hotels, or working in private jobs?
I like this. Like reparations from Walmart.
Reparations from, I mean, yeah, I think I agree with Pascal that the material base of neoliberalism is, this like elevation of the private sector, privatization of state goods and services. And I think there are cultural manifestations to this, right? There is a neoliberal culture. There are different varieties of neoliberal culture. And I guess, I don't know what you would think, kind of this is just coming to my head, and I want to get Stefan's take on this. Privileged discourse is almost like the privatization of like the question of discrimination. Whereas, in discrimination, in the concept of discrimination and, having structural changes to improve the conditions of people enacted through state policy, we just like privatize everything, and it becomes like this. It just seems to chime so well, and then people can make money from it, right? Like anti-racism can become a business. What like if you could turn healthcare and the provision of healthcare into a private business, why can't you change the? Why can't you do the same thing for like race relations? Privatize it.
Yeah, my understanding is that kind of liberalism kind of won, right? Liberalism won completely. Like, so there was this struggle throughout the 19th century into quite late into the 20th century, especially in the United States with Jim Crow and stuff, of abolishing these kind of formalistic inequalities between like kind of the liberal citizens. We had all these kind of laws which make equal differences between everyone.
I got this statement that Janice Graham said is very important. There's a reason why reparations discourse rose significantly in the Trump era, and it has nothing to do with increased Black participation economically. That's very important. Reparations discourse rises at the peak of the most reactionary or right-wing discourse in American society. Why is that? I'm sorry for cutting you guys off. I just had to get that in.
So basically, liberalism won, liberalism succeeded. Okay, there's maybe like one little law which makes people formalistically unequal. Like, can women serve in combat positions in the United States military yet? Maybe like that's like the last law. But
I'm not sure about that. It's like, I think in the British Navy, women can't be on submarines. I think that's the.
I think they've just changed that in recent
years.
They
just changed it.
We've abolished all the laws which made us unequal. But, oh no, we're still unequal. What's happened? Like there's a problem. Like what's gone wrong? Something's gone wrong. And so liberalism can't admit that the problem is not just these laws, but a class society in which people are necessarily unequal.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a turn. Liberalism wasn't always this kind of thing which is talked about kind of personal or whatever. It was at this point in history, this great liberating force which was destroying these feudalistic laws that put legal barriers between us. But it succeeded, but obviously hasn't succeeded in making life equal because it couldn't. And so there's this turn towards the self. And this is, I think, this is kind of, you can see this in some kind of like postmodern literature, like in later Foucault, there's this turn towards the self, where it's kind of like, okay, the laws, we've got rid of the laws. The problem isn't class society. It can't be class society. So it must be people's attitudes. It must be something inbuilt into them, a problem with them where they're racist, they're sexist, they're classist, whatever. It's their personal attitudes within them. And then we need to kind of engage in this kind of therapeutic discourse where we heal their insides and fix them up and make them perfect. And obviously, as Jen said, like you can have an industry of doing this. And then once we've fixed everyone up inside, then we can, then things will be equal. But obviously this is kind of like, and this is why there isn't an obvious end to privilege, where there isn't like a clear kind of like, we're making progress on privilege or whatever, because this is a solution which doesn't work. The reason why we have inequality in our society now is because we live in a class society, and there'll always be inequality in a class society. That's the nature of a class society. But kind of liberalism doesn't want to admit this, so it has this turn to the self, and then privilege discourse goes on and on and on and on, decade after decade, saying the same stuff, because it's just shooting at a target which doesn't exist, or it's shooting a gun which isn't firing, you know?
Or they have a material interest. Like, if Robin DiAngelo solved racism, what would she do? Where would she go? You know, what would she write about? You know, if you solve these kind of issues, you know, it's you know, I'm not saying that these people are like, you know, I don't want to solve this issue like in a very self-conscious way, but if you solve an issue, suddenly the need for the whole apparatus propagating the ideology doesn't exist anymore.
Super Chat says humanity is rising. I hope it's because of this conversation.
Well, you know, Stefan always brings.
This is very important, Stefan. I really I appreciate you sparking this conversation. It's very timely. It's very important. I'm glad Gene is here as well to put in his intellectual expertise and thoughts on this, because these ideas, and both of you being academics understand, these things come out of academia at a very strategic moment in time. After, number one, we have a major economic crash in 2008. Then you have large segments of American society thinking about returning to materialist, Marxist, anti-capitalist politics. You have the rise of a black president talking about we're in a post-racial America and being the embodiment of racial neoliberalism. I can be president, so everything is okay. As long as we have black people in the ruling class, everything is fine. And then after that project largely fails for most working class people, but particularly black people, we have this rise of this discourse, having everyone to talk about how I feel, how I look, what I feel, how you make me feel, with the privilege I don't have, the wokeness. And in that same era of reactionary Trumpism, people are now saying we need reparations in the face of the failure of the neoliberal Black President Project. It's almost Kafkaesque, if you think about it.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, Stefan?
On Obama.
The whole conundrum.
Do you think how self-conscious is this? Is this turn? You know, like I think it's well known to viewers of the show that Pascal often thinks these ideological turns are more self-consciously implemented by actors within the state and civil society, whereas I tend towards seeing these kind of shifts as being spontaneous results of sort of structural changes and failures. And probably the truth is somewhere between both those two things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely a person who's too much. I recognize myself that like I never see anything as intentional. Like I think people have plans and people plan to do things, but no one's plan that ever succeeds, and nothing ever happens as anyone intends it. That's my way of seeing things, which I think I'm too far into, and so I don't see privilege as kind of something that's like a deliberate ploy. Though obviously we can't discount this possibility. Obviously there are CIA agents and other agents who are engaged. I mean, you saw this thing about there being like 40,000 secret police in America who are doing something. Like they did a controlled release that they are doing this to kind of make us crazy or whatever. Obviously this kind of stuff is going on, but I think whenever I'm reading this stuff, I'm always treating these people as genuine. And I think that helps you in sense of like, it lets you kind of understand what like kind of the hegemonic discourse is. There isn't kind of these people that are like, they're all kind of lying to each other, but there's no kind of like central nexus. There's not kind of someone who's like forced this upon everyone. People are just kind of collectively confused or deluded or wrong or whatever, you know.
Super chat from Yokohama, 1914. When your only tool is a hammer, all your problems look like nails.
That's true. Everything's racist, so we need more anti-racism seminars.
Do you think this is a result of petty bourgeoisie anxiety?
Yes.
Yes. Particularly, Jason. Jason, I'd like you to jump here.
Yeah.
What's one of the things that I always say, that the current racial discourse in America is a crisis of Black elite neuroses.
Well, you told me, and I won't mention the name, but I remember you telling me, Pascal, a very famous Black academic. You had spoken to someone, and you firmly believed that guy was like literally terrified of white people, even though he was sitting in his very nice, endowed chair at a university in a very comfortable life like that. He was like scared of white people.
Let me tell you why. And Jason, I'd like you to jump in if you agree or you disagree.
Now I got to get in your Tupac.
No, but check it out though. We understand, right, the trajectory of the history, how racial democracy, which means race first pleas from the state to alleviate the harms of racism, that came about in the 60s. And again, this is important. Why did it come about in the 60s? Because the class programs that Black people were fighting for in the 30s and the 40s got neutralized by the McCarthy era. Very important. Bayard Rustin, A. Philip Randolph, even Ella Baker. These people were socialists and communists in the 30s and 40s. So it wasn't like Black people always were like race first, race first. That's not true. In the 30s and 40s, they were demanding class-based programs for working class, poor Blacks. So because the McCarthyism in the 50s and 60s, they go to racial democracy. Race first, race first. Get rid of racism, get rid of racism. What happens in the 70s? The Black middle class expands, and so does the Black poor and working class, who gets what? Mass incarceration, heroin epidemics, deindustrialization, no jobs, and they proliferate, and they become called the underclass. So they get out of the sharecropper.
We get the rise of the internal colony.
Yes.
Theory. I don't know if you're studying that as well, Stefan, the internal colony theory.
Yes. So what happens? Because the thing that got Black people out of Jim Crow, which was really rooted in the fact of other phenomena, like we talked about this with Jason, the Cold War, like sharecropping work was obsolete, like the rise of Nazism made racism tasteless in American society. Now we have this entry into a post-Jim Crow society. Since people believe that it was the racial democracy, race first, that got them there, they are now stuck in believing the race first will help them, when the race first thinking is only furthering neoliberalism. And because they have lost, Black people have lost a critique of capitalism, what is it causing? An increase of neuroses.
Well, I will add this, because someone said in the chat, is the beef you had with Skip Gates, and that was not the person. We will not say who the person is, but it definitely wasn't Skip Gates. But Skip Gates, I don't know if Stefan knows Skip Gates. That's fine. It's more of an American phenomenon. But Skip Gates is kind of, I would say, the master of this, right? He makes these great, beautifully shot 18-part docuseries on the Middle Passage and Reconstruction and being Black between 1925 to 1972 and all the troubles on these fallen Black souls. But he never, ever, ever, ever brings up the Communist Party and the Civil Rights Movement. He never brings up capitalism whatsoever. It's just a tale of racism and how we've overcome racism. It's almost a bootstrapping tale, if you will. And that becomes the main narrative, right? I was in a store the other day and I was looking at the magazine section, and it was just filled with kind of like Skip Gates-esque, yes, we've made it covers of these magazines. Oh, hold on. I'm going to, sorry, Gene threw me off.
Sorry, buddy.
Headlines,
I
magazines.
used to be the recipient of that shit that I do to you guys all the time. You want to bring up the headline?
Yeah, well, no, I just wanted to ask. I didn't want to cut you off there, Jason. I just wanted to ask. So we had Priya Gopal. I'm sure you've come across her. We had her on a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah,
and,
I heard you were talking about Britain and Brexit.
We were talking about Britain and Brexit. It was an interesting conversation. But one thing she said, which I agree with, and I think needs to be emphasized, is that a lot of this culture war bullshit in the United States is being like, it's not just spreading naturally to the UK. It is like American money is bringing this like whole like same discourse. But also on the flip side, we're seeing a lot of this privileged discourse back in the UK, bruv. We got like white privilege up in North London, innit, mate? So we're seeing Pascal actually does probably one of the best British accents that they did.
I heard it earlier. It was certainly something.
It was an amazing British accent. But I wanted to talk about like how this is being used in the UK, and you had some like examples of like how kind of weird this discourse gets at time through some of the headlines that we're seeing in newspapers. So I was wondering if Jason could put those up, and perhaps we could talk about those a little bit. In it,
the Meghan Markle headline, right?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, if you look at these headlines, this one and the other one that we're not showing, they're both in American papers. So this isn't part of kind of a British discourse, but this is kind of an American kind of, I don't know, I don't think the authors are British either. One's from the Washington Post, one's from the New York Times. And yeah, obviously there's something very strange going on here, right? If we look at this, we say like, Prince Harry finally takes on his white privilege his own. And the other one says, Prince Philip, symbol of white male privilege. And you're like, surely they aren't. Like, if you're trying to, like, if we're saying, okay, there's white male privilege, presumably kind of the best example of that would be kind of like an average white guy, right? Instead, they're saying like, oh, these princes, what determines how they are and how the privileged position that they're in is because they're white or they're male. And you're like, that's not right. That's just kind of prima facie nonsense. They're in the position they are because they're princes, they're royalty. But the interesting stuff about kind of the exportation of the culture war is obviously we had this British culture war over Brexit, but kind of the most recent attempts of kind of the Tory party to bring in kind of a culture war into the UK aren't really working. So they've tried with this. They've been trying to talk about white privilege, like kind of. But if you look kind of like in like records of kind of Parliament or whatever, it's not Labour MPs which are talking about white privilege or whatever. It's just Conservatives, and they're reacting to kind of like a few charities or kind of like NGOs and these kind of people, which do very quickly get this discourse from America. But it's mostly kind of like a reaction, as if the Tories are trying to like fight the other side of the American culture war, and they're just looking like complete idiots as they do so. With the European Football Championship, half kind of the English football players in the national team are black, and they're almost all working class, and so they have like a lot of experience with racism, and they care about it a lot, kind of in football and elsewhere, and they've done a lot to do with it. Especially Marcus Rashford has been this very influential force and kind of social change in Britain, even though at the same time he's a professional football player. And Tory MPs were like attacking the English football team, which is one of our most popular national institutions, before the European Football Championship, on the assumption that we'd get knocked out in the early rounds and they could blame it on BLM Marxism and white privilege, like, and all this kind of stuff. And they took a massive fucking L because we got to the final and everyone loves the football team. So yeah, the Tories are kind of trying to export or import like a cut price version of the American culture war. The thing is, eventually you think it's going to succeed.
Well, I think one point
you see it in the NGOs.
One thing I would definitely say, and I think is extremely important to emphasize, is you point out, like you were pointing out that, you know, the notion that white privilege is like the reason Prince Harry is like in the position he is is like, it's an obfuscation. And it's like such a clear obfuscation of class. When Jared Diamond starts talking about like reparations and white privilege, you have all these elite sort of members of like corporate America talking about their white privilege. They are obfuscating the fact that their privilege is not white privilege. Their privilege is being a member of the bourgeoisie and the haute bourgeoisie with huge control power and influence over the economic and social structure of society. They influence the lives of millions of people because they control capital, not because of the color of their skin. So I think, I think really interesting, in some cases, some people are obviously adopting this discourse in in good faith, but for other people, it serves it operates as a mask to hide the genuine source of certain elements of society's privilege.
I mean, it doesn't have to be kind of like a deliberate ploy. It's just people go down the path of like least resistance, right?
Yeah, sure.
And kind of, there's this easy discourse, which for them doesn't require them to give away all their wealth. If you
they don't have to give up their money.
Like, saying, oh yeah, I should have 100% tax on myself, and I'll go to a diversity training. A bourgeois guy is always going to pick the diversity training, right? Even if it makes him feel a bit silly. It's better than giving away all his money to like a Marxist, right?
That's true. That is very true. Okay.
So the question becomes, what is the solution to all this? How exactly do we penetrate this ideological superstructure upon which we're stuck in a very, very narrow understanding of the social conditions that are displacing large numbers of working people, particularly Black and brown people, when the political discourse of the moment is forcing them into solutions that are not solutions, but obfuscations?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's this thing of kind of like, what can we really do? On one sense, it's kind of preparing the ground and preparing the discourse and preparing the weapons for kind of when, like a popular working class movement comes along, so that when that happens, we're kind of ready to talk in a way that's useful. Because obviously, I don't know, maybe this is kind of academic nihilism, but, I'm just going to try and write a book and then publish it, and then a few people will read it. I'm not trying to myself like change the world. And I think that's definitely one thing which happens with academics, is that kind of you get the delusion that the thing that you're doing is the most important thing. That's not what I think. I don't think clarifying, like arguing about whether we should talk about privilege or not talk about privilege is the most important thing we can do. I'm not talking about this as opposed to like industrial relations, because I think it's more important than industrial relations. It's just what I'm good at. It's what I'm studying. I'm not very good at math, so that's why I'm not a political economist, So I think that's something we should always bear in mind. But yeah.
Gene, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I agree. I completely. I mean, I agree. I agree with everything that's. I think Stefan has really laid out a very good case today on what the privilege discourse is, because I think these words, and you mentioned it right at the beginning. People are just like shooting privilege on Twitter all over the place. It infects discourse, and there isn't really a deep interrogation about A, what this means, B, what are the implications of using the term privilege over other terminology, and C, how does this fit into a broader, a broader social and historical moment in which we are, right? And I think I think this is an important discussion to have. You know what I would like, Pascal, at some point I would love to facilitate a conversation between Stefan and Dr. Paul McComb, because they have like very interesting critiques on this. Because I think on the materialist left, as Pascal describes us, we have to fight a two-front war, right? And what is that two-front war? Well, obviously, the obvious front in the war is against the political right. But the other front of the war is against, whatever you want to call it, neoliberalism, liberalism, radical liberalism. And that war is often a lot more difficult to navigate because the political right gives us like they oppose things. Mostly they're opposing things that we think are good, they think are bad, right? Whereas when trying to combat the liberal left, the liberal discourse of the Democratic Party, the way that identity politics is mobilized against the left, we're finding a difficult battle because we have, at least on the surface, to a normie, it looks like we're fighting for similar things, right? You want to end white supremacy, you want to end discrimination. To a normie, isn't that the same thing, right? And at the same time, the kind of radical liberals will constantly attack the materialist left for ignoring race, ignoring gender, for being class reductionist, which is not the case. It's just that the left, whether you're a sort of class struggle social democrat to a revolutionary socialist, you believe it is the economic structures and the racial inequalities that are baked into those economic structures, which are historically constituted, right? That are the cause, and not the personal internal struggle. The reason for, I remember very clearly, Brianna Joy Gray said, if it wasn't for history, she wouldn't care if somebody called her the N-word, right? If it wasn't for the historical connotations, context, and inequalities, people don't get as offended when you say cracker or what's the one that you use, Pascal? Peckerwoods, right?
Yes.
Peckerwoods. People don't get. Peckerwoods is, I think, what is a peckerwood?
Peckerwood is actually a bird.
Yeah. Okay, so it's someone from.
I'm very offended now. I'm not a bird.
You're not a peckerwood. It's like gammons in England. We talk about people as being a gammon because they're very pink skinned and they have a shaved head, but they just don't have the same historical weight and structures that made being called an N-word not just it's impolite, but that it could be a prelude to some kind of physical, very literal physical violence, right?
Yeah, we got a super chat here. Thank you, John CM. Does Protestantism, specifically the Gnostic elements, contribute to privileged discourse? There are a lot of historical parallels, at least how I see it.
I mean,
That's
the classic thing with privileged discourse is that it's more Catholic, right? 'Cause it's all about guilt.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And absolution as well, in the form of diversity training.
Interesting. Do you think it's more Catholic than Protestant?
Yeah, I mean, but I guess the thing with Protestantism and Gnosticism is kind of, I guess, the thing of it seeing the world just from yourself. This is kind of meant to be the idea of kind of the rationalist Protestant revolution of just seeing the world kind of from your way of seeing things in your personal experience and kind of your personal relationship with God, or I guess your personal relationship with white privilege or whatever, I guess that parallel could be made.
Got another super chat from Chika Okoli. How can the limitations of appealing to material self-interest, i.e. rejection of vaccines, universal program, equal communists to some, be overcome?
I don't know. I think I'm a real Marxist productivist. I think kind of appealing to material self-interest can get us all the way.
I mean, you saw it with Obama, right? People think that, there were probably people who were pretty racist who voted for Obama in 2008 because they were like, you know what? I'm kind of done with George Bush and these Republicans. This Obama, at the time, looked like he was going to solve the healthcare issue. People were like, I kind of want to get some healthcare, so I don't like this black fellow, but I'm going to vote for him because of my material interest. And that's just one of the things that we have to do. It's that's why constantly harping on about privilege and I'm not saying you don't have to challenge racism, but constantly doing going above and beyond to get people's backs up is often not probably the most helpful strategy. We should be emphasizing our common interests and not what divide us. And once we built those common bonds, then start challenging those attitudes and feelings through interpersonal relations, right? Like getting people into labor unions, multiracial labor unions, I think would probably do a lot more for dealing with racism amongst the working class than, for example, like forcing everybody in the coal mine to go to a diversity training with Robin DiAngelo. What do you think, guys? And I know we have our other guest coming on very soon, so I guess we'll be wrapping up this section relatively soon. Is that correct, guys?
Yeah, no,
Yes.
I agree.
It's a conundrum, man. I mean, I wish we had a left that was interested in talking to working class people, so we could talk to them in a way we can collapse this bubble by bringing them the direct answer to what these problems are, and the way in which their suffering is rooted in the exploitation of capitalism and the need to create an economic paradigm where they have control and shares in the means of production.
Amen to that, Pascal. I think we really I think this is a very important discussion to have, because we have to be clear with our terms, and we have to be able to combat the slings and arrows that will be thrown at the political left by liberalism. The way that they've done it, the way that they've tried to mobilize, just as we saw in the Bernie Sanders campaign, or just as we see, we saw in the Bernie Sanders campaign, with Hillary Clinton in the Hillary Clinton era, attempts to say that Bernie didn't care about race and gender, only cared about class. I mean, are you going to tell me Hillary Clinton, who literally had
the crime bill, mass incarceration, and the deregulation
she ran a racialist campaign in 2008.
She ran a racialist campaign, and she had incarcerated labor working for her at the governor's mansion in Arkansas.
She had slaves.
Yeah, in Arkansas, Bill Clinton and this is. I mean, I know. Hitchens is a controversial figure, but one thing I will always appreciate of Christopher Hitchens, and I know Pascal feels the same, even though he's Hitchenson skeptical, is the fact that Hitchens continuously emphasized that the Bill Clinton executed a mentally ill, a mentally deficient, a mentally disabled black man in order to prove his tough on crime bona fides during the 1992 election. And that is something that, when it was so, and of course, this discourse is always cynically, it's always so cynically deployed, because, people weren't talking about white privilege of Hillary Clinton or things like that. It's only when it's to combat the political left, but it is effective. And I think we have to be aware that it's effective, because this privilege discourse, and I don't know what you guys all think of this, it also is infecting the material, people who at least posture as the materialist left. Would you not agree?
Definitely. Here we got a super chat though. Is there some reason the names Adolph Reed and Walter Bell Michaels are not being mentioned here? I would love to see them on your show. We've had Adolph Reed on twice, and we're all very aware of the work of Walter Bell Michaels. We might get Adolph and Walter on in the near future. Adolph Reed has, we're friends with Toya Reed, Adolph Reed's son.
Adolph Reed was your second most watched video.
Yeah, I mean, we've had Adolph Reed a couple of times. We're in communicate. We communicate with Adolph Reed probably 3-4 times a month, maybe sometimes once
on
a week.
The show, or we know Adolph.
I mean,
Pascal's on the phone to Ture every day. I mean, not every day, but
we text all the time. Yeah.
Last one, and then we got to go. We have our next guest here. That's in the room, and we have some more surprises coming up for the show.
Yes, there's class privilege. I totally agree, because it's material, right? Yeah, if you own the means of production, that's a big. If you can dictate the lives of millions of people and tell them what to like, think of this. Like Americans are like, this may sound mean. Americans are often quite like massive cucks when it comes to like power. And why do I say that? It's because like they will cry about like a distant government, maybe like trying to encourage them to take a vaccine, but they will let their bosses dictate their lives. Like, you have to like dress like this, you can't do this on social media, you have to come to work dressed like as a fucking giant rat to work at Chuck E. Cheese, and they will not see.
Or piss yourself.
Yeah, or piss in a bottle, right? Or piss in a bottle and then say thank you to the job creators, right? This is, I'm just being like controversial saying like Americans are like this, a lot of places are like this, but yeah, class privilege is privilege because you can dictate the way people live their lives. Even if you own a small business, this concept of the small business tyrant. You dictate the rhythm of someone's life. One of the reasons I like being an academic is because the heavy hand of my boss on me, like feeling oppressed, it like isn't there. And I've worked, I come from a economically privileged background, but my dad was a little bit of a hard ass and was like, if you want to go party, you got to have your own money. So I've worked in a factory, I've worked in like takeaways, I've done like working class jobs, and those guys dictate like vast amounts of your time, not just in forcing you to go to work, but in the way that you dress, act. Like I had to, I wasn't allowed to have a beard, right? I wasn't allowed to do this. When I worked in retail, I had to dress like this. I had to cut my hair like this. It was this is a huge privilege.
I would actually argue in the context of people will say, well, the class in Black America ain't got no privilege and Black folk ain't got no wealth. No, because the privilege of being a Black elite is that you get to control the ideological superstructure of Black discourse, Black media, and Black cultural production, so you can shape a Black politics that benefits you disproportionately to working class and poor Black people. So yes, Black elite people have class privilege relative to the majority of Black people as well.
Do you know what the four most trusted institutions are in America? Like, in this order? Military, small business, health system, and the police.
That sounds about right. And small business, right? People, Americans, like, at least in terms of discourse, are like so big into small businesses. Small businesses are sometimes, not always, but sometimes some of the biggest tyrants as bosses, right? The little... and then they guilt trip you with that, like, we family, you know what I mean? So like, working for a corporation is sometimes like better than working for like a big bureaucratic corporation can be better than working for like a small business where they like terrorize you.
I wanted to address that question. We're going to do a Black August show. I am Black. My birthday's in August, so every show is Black.
Damn.
Wax on, wax off. I love the comments, by the way, guys. Like,
so let's bring in our next guest, Stefan. Always a pleasure. Thank you very much. Good.
Thank you very much, Stefan, comrade. You were excellent.
Please, we stay in touch via the Twitter. I'm going to follow your progress and your success. And are you going to walk the stage when you get your?
Yeah,
I
filled out my first U.S. tax form, which indicates things are going very well.
There you go.
That's excellent. When are you coming to the U.S., Stefan? Are you going to be coming?
Eventually, but we're not filming in the U.S. probably, so not in the immediate future. But yeah, obviously I want to come. I'm getting my second jab at the end of August, so.
So we may see you. We may see you in real life. It's exciting.
Wow.
Well, let's bring in. Thank you, Stefan. Have a good rest of your night, brother.
Can I just
Oh shit! Yes, you can.
Thanks. Bye.
No, go ahead. What are you gonna do?
No, I'm just leaving. Bye.
Oh. Now, Pascal, would you like to hear? I'm gonna mute Gene because his dog is very loud. Pascal.
Yes, sir.
You want to introduce our next guest?
Yes, our next guest is a civil rights attorney, Mr. Peter Patakas, who lives in Cleveland, Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
who I reached out to me on social media as a lifetime witness to the election of Chantel Brown versus Nina Turner that we just saw in Cleveland, who is going to give us some analysis in terms of what happened in that election and how exactly we got to this conclusion. And I think it's going to open up a lot of questions and understanding as to what exactly is going on.
So coming at us live all the way from Cleveland, Ohio, Peter Patokas. Oh, damn. You're muted.
Okay. Is he muted or you muted?
I didn't mute him.
We can't hear you, Peter. You have audio problems.
Give me 1 second here. I'm gonna message with Peter. Can you and Gene talk about stuff?
We'll vamp while you fix. While you fix it.
Come in and help you.
Oh, we got Marcus is jumping in.
Bam! What's up?
How's it going?
Me?
How's it going, Marcus? Did you watch our privilege discussion?
I did. I enjoyed it. I mean, I thought, which I was, when the last time Stefan was on, I think we all were pretty interested in his work and what he had to say on the topic. And yeah, I largely agree on everything he had to say, and anything, like I just tied to, like, there seems to be quite a bit of like just a range of discourse that kind of goes to that same end of like just being able to have white people talk and write books, and then it doesn't really go anywhere.
Well, some people can make money, like everybody has a chance.
Here we go.
Oh,
okay. Can you get the?
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Can we? Okay. We got two accounts. Whoa! This is whoa.
This is trippy.
Sorry about the technical difficulties, gentlemen.
No problem. So Peter, my man, we got this. Let me introduce you to the crew. As you already been talking to me, my host, I am the co-host, is Jason Miles, who helped you sign on. This is Gene Bajlan, who's part of the Normal Foreign Policy, as well as overall This is Revolution podcast crew. And this is our man, Marcus, who is part of our Saturday This is Revolution podcast. Gene is an academic. Marcus is an activist with an organization called Left Flank Vets, who are former military veterans who have leftist, socialist-like politics, also former government staffer. So I just want to give you a brief background. For those who don't know.
And Marcus is from Ohio.
Marcus is also from Ohio, originally. Peter reached out to me because he really has a good on-the-ground inside baseball and what happened in the election of Nina Turner. One of the reasons let me give you this context. I tweeted out to Dr. Jason Johnson of the neoliberal apologist on MSNBC that an article he wrote in the Griot trying to analyze why Nina Turner lost the election was off because he was basically blaming her without acknowledging the fact that there were literally over $2 million of Zionist PAC money that was dumped into the end of part of the election that significantly caused a massive increase of turnout in majority white, largely Jewish suburbs of Cleveland, particularly a place called Beechwood. And that this factor was being significantly neglected in the area. But what I found interesting about Peter's analysis, and I give him mad props for that, he conceded that, yes, Chantel Brown won largely because of the white Jewish vote. And yes, even though Nina Turner did get the majority of black vote, he believes, and I will give him the platform, that Nina Turner could have won this easily if she didn't take for granted that she was going to not face this kind of rabid opposition from the neoliberal Democrats, because she didn't churn out the black vote as much as she could have. And she still would have gotten it. And Peter, you want to take it from here and let me know? And also, by the way, Peter has filed lawsuits against Chantel Brown, knows her well, and has been in mediation with her. So he's on the ground. Peter, break it down.
Thank you, Pascal. I just want to say it's an honor to be here. I've admired your work for a long time now. Thanks for having me on. Just to correct the record, we never had a pending lawsuit against Ms. Brown. It ended up settling out of court, and it was with respect to party machinery. I'm obliged to keep the details of the settlement confidential, but needless to say, I know this party well and the way that the local party here works in Cuyahoga County. There are a couple of stories I can tell you that lay the backdrop to what's happened here. But I do want to get right to what you were saying about Nina Turner's loss. You're absolutely correct that she should have seen this coming, that once this dark money came in from the groups, essentially Israeli Defense Force lobbying groups, the Democratic Majority for Israel spent $1 to $2 million in this race, flooding our airwaves, flooding my mailbox with propaganda. Not just, there were Israeli flags on campaign mailers that were sent into our mailboxes in Ohio. They did this because they knew that it would be effective. Nina Turner had to know that this was going to be effective. Now, Pascal, you saw the link that I tweeted at you in response to your tweet about this that broke down the Jewish vote in these districts. That literally shows you could say that the Jewish vote was the difference in this race. Okay.
Peter, can you put that link? Can you put that link in the chat, and Jason, maybe we can post it? Do you have? Can you get that access?
Yeah, let me try to do that. I'm having technical difficulties.
It's a little harder for him, Pascal.
Let me see if I can do that.
Yeah, he's doing like 12.
But let me keep talking because. So first of all, I don't want to. I think you might have overstated my case a little bit when you say that Nina would have won easily. I'm not sure she would have won easily, but I do think that you're talking. What is that? This was a race where the party, the corporate Democrats, the Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton Democrats, have deliberately depressed the voter turnout. And you are talking about a heavily gerrymandered blue district where the corporate Democrats that have been in charge of this party for more than a decade, really since Obama, but they really tightened their control during the Clinton campaign and especially this last round when it was Bernie against Biden. There has been a deliberate suppression of the urban vote. There has been, and we are talking about an area where the urban population and the Black population has been extremely disempowered. The infant mortality in Cleveland is deplorable. I believe we have the highest infant mortality rates in the nation. The school district, I believe, is I don't know a single white person that sends their children to public schools in Cleveland. I mean, it's absolutely a ghettoized city, and the economic segregation too is among the very worst in the nation. And you are talking about an election where only, I believe the turnout in this race was somewhere between 18% and 20% district-wide. And, within that context, Chantel Brown won by about 5,000 votes. I believe the total amount was something like 36,000 votes to 31,000 votes. It was somewhere around there. So, that's not a very big delta. And that delta came almost entirely from wealthy East Side suburbs, including the suburb of Beechwood that you mentioned. And one thing that's very interesting that we saw here, and I think it's very relevant, and people are overlooking the fact that this is a heavily gerrymandered district. So what that meant was that Republicans, people that would otherwise vote GOP, registered to vote as Democrats in this election, specifically to beat Nina Turner.
And say it again for the people in the back, Peter. Say it again for the people in the back.
Yeah. So we saw a lot of that, and in that piece that I linked for you, that is on our Twitter feeds, it showed that these districts that went heavily for Brown, there is a lot of overlap between Trump voters in those districts. So essentially, you could say that a large portion of the vote that flipped this race for Shontel Brown over Nina Turner were Republicans that voted for Trump in the last election. And Nina Turner did not do the same thing. So what Nina Turner would have had to do to win, and I think she could have done this, is, and I think the Ohio Democratic Party really needs to learn this lesson, is, there are a lot of people who might be turned off by Bernie Sanders and Killer Mike flying in here, AOC flying in here to say, look, you've got to vote for Nina. She cares for people, not for corporations, etc. There are people that want to hear that message here, but maybe don't like the celebrity culture of it. But there are Republicans or people that probably voted for Trump that live in this district that would hear a message of, look, this right versus left is nonsense. We live under a regime of one party rule, and that party is the money party. That party is the party of unbridled corporate cash. And that is who I, Nina Turner, am running against. You can see how corrupt these Democrats are. People know how dirty these stadium deals are, for example. And that's really something that I would like to talk about more, is the stadium deals that happen here. And there was an especially interesting episode a few years ago in 2017 where basically the activist community went to the Ohio Supreme Court against the local Democrats. But these are issues that people on both sides of the so-called red versus blue divide see eye to eye on. And Nina didn't go to that well. And she should have known that she would have had to have. And I see someone in the chat here. Thank you. Someone just posted how Cleveland's Jewish community, this chat's moving fast, but somebody just posted, there it is. How Cleveland's Jewish community denied a would-be squad member a seat in Congress. So, that's the link where you'll see how this broke down. But again, I think that had Nina courted that vote, I saw someone else in the chat say that Nina sort of soft-pedaled this election. And I think there's an argument that she did. And the only thing that encourages me about this is that this seat was vacated by Marcia Fudge when Marcia Fudge was appointed to Joe Biden's cabinet. And so this is going to be up again next year. This seat is going to be open again next year, and Nina may run for it next year. So what we might have seen was a test run here. So maybe she'll get it right next year. That's what gives me some hope.
I just have a quick question, just to clarify something. So do you?
I can stop there, but I hope that I've made the point that I believe there is a substantial portion of people here in Ohio that feel completely disenfranchised by both parties, that understand that what goes on in Washington, what goes on here in Columbus is largely kabuki theater, and that people want that to stop. They don't have people, they know they're not being represented in the halls of Congress. They know they're not being represented in the State House here in Columbus, and they want solutions, but they're turned off by, the squad can be a dirty word with some of these people, for better or worse, but they would vote for a candidate like Nina Turner if they could see that she really was the solution to some of these problems that we're having. Well,
I just wanted to ask a quick question, which was, do you think the intervention from the members of the squad was the factor for the kind of X factor that brought Republicans into the process? So on one hand, the squad was not bringing in new voters. amongst the base. But on the other hand, the squad's kind of intervention mobilized Republicans to take part in a primary. And do you think that means that the nationalization of political races does not necessarily work well for the political left?
I can say this: I don't think it played well here. I don't think it played well here. And, you know, I want to respect cultural diversity. You know, every place is different. But here in Ohio, you have cities and you have farms right next to one another, and wide swaths of suburbia in between. You can go from inner city to a very, very pastoral countryside in 15 minutes. You know,
you could pass a few $1 million houses in between that 15 minutes too.
That's right. And certainly the squad was weaponized against her in this race. There was not enough groundswell for that kind of appeal to work for Nina, at least not in this race. And I don't know about her ground game. I wasn't that connected to the race. I do know that, we do know that the turnout in some of Cleveland's poorest wards was as low as 6%. So that suggests some failure in the ground game, some failure to get some buses up and running, and to get people that really need Nina Turner's representation over Shontel Brown's to the polls. And you know, again, you can just look at the turnout numbers to see that there had to be some problem with the ground game, because these folks had to know, Nina Turner's campaign had to know that that Beechwood, Shaker Heights, Bentleyville, the east side suburbs were going to come out heavily for Shontel.
So let me ask you a question, Peter. You know that one of the narratives I have is about discussing the role of the Black political class and kind of cartelling the Black vote. Was there any signal from high officials now we do know that Nina Turner is a member of the Black political class in Ohio. She's just one that they would consider has gone rogue. But was there an echo chamber of high-ranking members in the Black political class who were aligned with the centrist Democrats that were coming against her, who were locals in Ohio?
This race was surprisingly muted in that regard. And Nina had a surprising level of establishment support in this race, actually. Nina had the support of Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson, for example, which, you know, Frank Jackson is a corporate Democrat through and through. So that was surprising. Nina had a
few labor unions as well.
That's correct. You didn't so much see that on the local level. Now, of course, you had James Clyburn fly into town, which that's another thing, you know, because James Clyburn said that Killer Mike insulted him, so he had to fly up to Cleveland and answer for that.
Yeah, but he doesn't have the organizational connections to give out the fatback and biscuits in Ohio that someone like Marsha Fudge has, you know. So
and Marsha Fudge stayed silent in this race. Now, you know, there was we did see the usual suspects in you know, there's a notorious character around here named Norman Edwards, who's the head of what he calls the Black Contractors Group. Mm-hmm. And you know, he came out strongly for Shontel Brown. But really, what I noticed was the more the white mainstream culture here was supporting Brown. But I would say the establishment was fairly split in this race. And this was really about the voter turnout. And this was really about the wealthy east side suburbs turning out for Brown. Adam Christensen, a man named Adam Christensen tweeted this week, I believe it was yesterday, it's becoming clear that Nina Turner lost because of special election low turnout and Republicans voting for Brown. And he said there's a strong likelihood of her coming back and winning this seat next year like Rep. Marie Newman and Cori Bush. So, that's.
By the way, Fudge early on in May did say, I read an article, she had dinner with Chantel Brown, and she did endorse Brown. I learned that very late in the game. But you're saying, what my position was is that was a on the low kind of thing. It was. Yeah. I never saw her doing commercials. I never saw her publicly speaking out against Tina Turner.
Yeah, it was sort of a calculated neutrality, I think, that was leaning towards Brown. And I think Brown ended up doing a TV spot and some print ads with Marsha Fudge's mother. So I know I got at least one mailer with Marsha Fudge's mother depicted. And yeah, someone else brought up in the chat, Bill Crystal endorsed Chantel Brown.
Well, Janice Graham in the chat asked a very good question. Who had the teachers union on lock in Cleveland? Was it Brown or Tina Turner?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Did what role then did the potentially $2 million that the Democratic majority for Israel had on it? Because people, I've seen people saying, it wasn't dark money that swung this election. But, you don't drop $2 million into a primary campaign if you don't think it will make a difference. How did that money figure in?
I think it absolutely figured in. I think it absolutely tilted the race, because what it did was it drove turnout in these wealthy East Side Jewish suburbs and with large Jewish populations. And look, I mean, I have interacted with plenty of Jewish people, members of the diaspora, who equate opposition to Israeli public policy with anti-Semitism. We know that has been a highly successful propaganda campaign. And for wealthy suburbanites in Ohio who maybe don't know a whole lot about this issue, but they see that Israeli flag on Chantel Brown's mailers, and they're going to vote for her. And they're going to see, Nina Turner tweeting Palestinian Lives Matter, and they are simply going to be galvanized to vote for that reason alone. And it's unfortunate, but this sort of propaganda campaign has been highly successful. And it frankly, it worked here. I don't know how you can say that it didn't, especially when you look at these numbers. And part of me wishes that Nina Turner would have confronted this more directly. Now, obviously, that's a third rail for her. If she comes out and says, look, folks, I love you Jewish people here in this area, but we have got to get over this idea, this dangerous, malicious, defamatory idea that if you oppose something the Israeli government does, that you are an anti-Semite. That is propaganda. And it is wrong and it is dangerous. And here's how it's dangerous. Imagine if someone said that if you were opposed something that the U.S. government did, that you were a racist or a bigot. I mean, look, it's obvious. I don't need to convince this crowd, but part of me wishes that Nina Turner would have taken that on more straightforwardly and gotten on the streets in these Jewish neighborhoods to explain to well-meaning Jews that to sort of unpack this propaganda and neutralize this propaganda, because it's obviously embedded. And I know this from my conversations with well-meaning Jewish people, that it's very hard to get them to understand. I should say they automatically assume that if you support Palestinian human rights, that you are anti-Semitic. And when you have conversations with people, it's not hard to get them to understand that is not the case.
So what was the ground game like? What was there an issue with the ground game? Because you said she should have been in the Jewish neighborhoods, but was she not hitting the tarmac?
Again, it's hard for me to say. I'm not involved at that level. I'm just not involved with the campaign at that level. And my understanding is that that this was determined by the bombing of the airwaves, that neither campaign was really out there knocking on that many doors. I mean, obviously there was canvassing done, but that the people that are voting in these low turnout special elections are wealthy people. They're people that are aware. They're high information voters largely speaking, they're wealthy, they're well off, they're affluent enough to know that there is a special election on a random Tuesday in early August, and they're going to get out to vote, whereas the people that are more inclined, the people in the struggling neighborhoods, people that would be inclined to vote for Nina and to understand that voting for Nina is in their interests, are not necessarily going to get out there to vote.
Well, you gave us some facts here. You said in certain poorer, and I would assume black demographics, voter turnout was as low as 6%, and the overall vote turnout was 18%. Do you believe that if Nina Turner had a massive get-out-the-vote effort in those black urban communities, that she would have made up the votes to win the election? Or would there have been a split because of the black political class and still would have taken her over the top?
I think that it's very likely. I mean, you're talking about a margin of $5,000. You're talking about a margin of 5,000 votes. So, I'm not a political analyst, but it seems like it would stand to reason that an election that was decided by a margin of approximately 5,000 votes, in a race where the turnout was approximately 18%, that a better ground game certainly could have made up that margin. And I do think that an especially promising area would have been to court the votes of Republicans and get Republicans, sort of people that are disaffected Trump voters, folks who voted for Trump because he was anti-establishment, and really reach out to those people living in this district, because I know they're here.
And I got a question, I guess, looking forward, because since this was a special election, we can assume that some of the moneyed interests aren't going to have the same amount of resources, at least focus on this one election. But I'd actually wonder if like Nina Turner would be seen as kind of like a constant pillar to always go after, where you'd see like even like they started paying attention to, Jamal Bowman or AOC kind of too late. Alex Morse, they'd had that, more of a successful opposition to his insurgent campaign. Nina Turner seems like she will be the obvious, progressive standard bearer among any challenger. And so you already said she should expect this. What do you think she should expect moving forward? Some type of same level or even more going forward in an actual, regular election season?
Well, I think she should certainly expect more of the same in terms of the propaganda campaign. I don't believe that there are people here. I guess I wouldn't necessarily consider Nina as a whipping boy around here. I don't think people blame Nina problems. I think that, and as someone mentioned in the comments, the bowl of shit comment about Joe Biden, where she equated voting for Joe Biden with eating half a bowl of shit. And Trump was a bowl of shit and Biden was half a bowl of shit. A lot of people think that really hurt her on the campaign trail with the more moderate Democrats. Now, at the same time, I would say there are a number of people that are on the right of the maybe on that would consider themselves on the political right, but on the anti-establishment right, that would love a comment like that. But I don't know that Nina went out and courted those voters again. And if I were her, that's who I would be focused on the next time.
Do we lose Peter?
Uh-oh. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you,
but we can't see you.
Okay. I don't know what's happening here.
It's all right, man. It's all right.
You can keep speaking.
You can keep talking.
I had another question too, because there was at least some data that there's quite a bit of Republican money coming in,
yes.
And even some connections between some of the Republican Party apparatus in Ohio, lending some of their help to Brown. I guess what's your take on that type of alliance, and I guess some people could, you assume like, hey, the Republicans would want the infighting. Maybe some more progressives allows them to paint the whole Democratic Party as like radical left. I guess what's your take on Republicans kind of linking arms with the centrist Democrats?
Well, I mean, isn't that what our politics is right now? It is this big, soft, comfortable middle, right? It's these people that don't care as much about the culture wars. They care about their own wealth. They care about the fact that they're comfortable. They go to cocktail parties with people that are ostensibly on the other side of the so-called divide. But they don't really care if a Republican or a Democrat wins, as long as it's a centrist, right? Mm-hmm. And it's that's why you had Republicans voting for Joe Biden over Donald Trump, right? That's the phenomenon that's at play here. And Chantel Brown, I mean, I just think in a lot of ways this really was a proxy. This really was a replay, at least in this district, of the Biden versus Bernie primary. And that the future of winning these battles is going to require reorienting people from the red versus blue and the right versus left, and to start orienting them toward the up versus down, the party of unbridled corporate cash versus the people. And I think there was a failure to do that here. And I think that in some ways there was a failure to try. And I don't know. I don't know if that was strategic. I think it's apparent from the results we saw. And I think that if she's going to do better, if she runs next year, she's going to have to embrace this, because the middle here in this district is very comfortable and they're going to go out and vote. And what this district is it's very wealthy suburbs and it's very, very poor ghettoized spaces and not a whole lot in between.
So we basically need to have a ground game of working class, cross-racial organizing, challenging the ruling class duopoly in the name of a progressive working class-based politics.
You said it, man. That's a good way to put it.
Peter, something kind of like alludes to is like, is it possible to separate yourself from the duopoly while within the duopoly?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I guess in some ways that's $1 million question. Are you really going to is a third party? Can you really take a path? Can you really take a path to a seat like this, running from a third party, or do you use the party?
Do we lose audio? We got video, but we lost. Do we lose audio?
We got a freeze frame.
We got a freeze frame.
Okay, we got audio back.
Let me turn this off. Sorry. Boy.
Deep state strikes again.
Yeah, that's the Jeep state.
Oh, got freeze frame and no audio.
I'm so sorry, because that is a worse face to get stuck in. Peter is stuck in an O face. Oh shit.
Don't leave him up like that, Jason. Why are you leaving him up like that?
Doing wrong, man.
I think Peter
Why are you doing him wrong?
light-skinned singer of all time, because that's what he.
Man, as soon as you ask about like, oh, hey, third party, boom, Jeep State got your ass.
Cuba probably
in this house.
Cuba probably sent in Cuba has a button which just cuts.
You still here?
Okay, let's see if it's working. Can you hear us, Peter?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, I hope you know we're just messing with you. We weren't.
Of course. Okay. No problem. Yeah. So look, I mean, I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, I don't know that a third party look, obviously, when was the last time a third party candidate has done anything? I don't know. It would seem that if that one could run within the existing two-party structure and explicitly say, I'm here to undo I'm here to undo the damage that's been caused by unbridled corporate cash and to take this party back for the people.
Well, I mean,
that to me would be again, I'm no political scientist, but that to me would be the mode. Folks, can I tell a little story about some background with Marcia Fudge and to talk about the kind of Democrats we're dealing with here that I have a little unique perspective on to put this into some context?
Yeah, please.
So what has happened here in Cleveland, and one of the issues in Cleveland where we have seen the population and seen a progressive movement coalesce most effectively is with respect to subsidies to the region's professional sports owners. The owners of the NBA team, the Cavaliers, Dan Gilbert, who is now worth $50 billion, as well as the Cleveland Browns owner, the Haslams, the Republicans from Tennessee. Bill Haslam was the governor of Tennessee, and the owner of the Cleveland Indians, now soon to be Cleveland Guardians, the Major League Baseball franchise. And what Marcia Fudge, who is, who Chantel Brown was touting as, her mentor, Marcia Fudge had a very chilling role and a very under-discussed role in quashing a citizens movement that coalesced in 2017 when Cleveland's political leaders essentially voted to give Dan Gilbert, who again is the owner of the Cavaliers, owner of Quicken Loans. He was worth about $5 billion back then. I believe his wealth has exploded to $50 billion in just this last few years. And the city's leaders voted to give him a handout that would have cost approximately $300 million. And what happened was a group of organizers that was led by the Greater Cleveland Congregations, which was a subsidiary of a national organization. I'm forgetting the name of this national organization, but they organized a campaign to collect signatures on petitions to put this issue on the ballot, where the people of Cleveland were going to get to vote on whether Dan Gilbert and the Cavaliers were going to get this handout from public money. And they did an excellent professional job of both getting press over this, collecting the signatures, and submitting those signatures to the Cleveland political leaders on city council. And what happened was one of the wildest chapters of progressive political history that I believe has happened in the U.S. in my lifetime. So the public was galvanized against this subsidy. And you had people on the right and the left that understood that this is a rotten deal. And they collected enough signatures. In fact, they collected far more than enough signatures. I believe they only needed to collect something like 5,000, and they collected like 50,000. It was something along those lines because they wanted to really blow them away. And the establishment here in Cleveland and in Cuyahoga County was so terrified of having the people have a say on this that the council clerk, the city council president, Kevin Kelly, who is now running for mayor and is probably the front runner to replace Frank Jackson, Cleveland's 4-term mayor, to show you what a corporate stranglehold there is here. But they refused to accept the signatures, and they had no legal justification to do it. So what these organizers did was took this case to the Ohio Supreme Court, and I represented them there in the Ohio Supreme Court, where we could file an original action because the council clerk's actions were so egregious that we were able to get the Supreme Court to order that the council clerk had to accept those petitions and put this issue on the ballot in November. So this all happened in, I want to say it was around September. No, I'm sorry, because this was another special election. So this was in August. So this was going to be in the November election. The Supreme Court ruled in August with respect to the November election. And what ended up happening here, and Pascal, I think you'll be very interested in this, is Marcia Fudge ended up putting her thumb on the scale in a big way. The establishment here went into complete panic mode. And what they did was Marcia Fudge essentially threatened the congregations of these preachers who were leading this effort. There are some news stories, and one that I think is just especially cryptic. If you Google this, there is a headline in the Plain Dealer, Cleveland.com, the biggest paper here, that says noon rally to pit old guard against new in political showdown over the Q. And it's the Q because it was the Quicken Loans Arena. And this is a piece by Seth Richardson, dated August 31st, 2017. It's funny, I see that it was updated on January 11th, 2019. I wonder what the heck that is about. But it's funny how this propaganda gets revised over time 2 years later. But essentially what they did was they got a number of new preachers to come out and speak how important it was that the public support this handout. And Marcia Fudge was going to host a rally, and these new preachers were going to be supported by Marcia Fudge. So essentially Marcia Fudge was telling the congregations to start going to church with these other preachers. And you had the same guy that I mentioned, Norman Edwards of the Black Contractors Association. And of course they say, oh, this will bring jobs to our community. You've got to give Dan Gilbert this handout that he doesn't need because it's jobs for us. And it was so within 24 hours, the greater Cleveland congregations ended up caving. They withdrew the petitions, and the issue never went to the ballot. And they said that they made a deal for some mental health centers to go up in the city, and they presented it as a win, but nobody else in the community saw it that way. And it was just they just snuffed out this progressive movement here, and that was about as close to democracy as we had seen in Cleveland in the last 50 years. And it was just snuffed out. And I just want to say that Chantel Brown is very much a part of this corporate Democratic Party that snuffed that ballot issue down. And just this week, we saw that the Cleveland Indians owners are being handed a similarly sized $300 million subsidy. And politicians on both sides of the so-called red and blue divide are rubber stamping it. So
that sounds like
back in biscuits.
Yeah, very flaky biscuit.
If you don't know, my term or our term here, this is Revolution, for patronage given out by corporate Democrats to black constituents or anyone's constituents, black, white, or whatever. We should just make this for everyone. We call them fatback and biscuits. So this is clearly a fatback and biscuits play.
And Peter, could you kind of juxtapose it with like what some of those like pastors are also fighting for? And like, I mean, I grew up in Columbus, but going through like, especially like the 90s into the 2000s, like literally, a seemingly dying city resurging with a basketball player. But like, yeah, I guess like what's kind of like some of those things that they're fighting for, and like what's the actual needs of Cleveland, not just a few new bleachers.
Well, sure, and as I said at the beginning of the segment, Cleveland has historic infant mortality rates, historic poverty, the highest infant mortality rates in the nation, the second worst public schools in the nation. There was a stat that I think it was 33%, some shocking number of Cleveland public school, high school students had considered suicide. Or I think it was something more than half even, I think. And you can look this up. It was a shocking number of Cleveland high school students in the public schools had reported in a survey of having considered suicide in the last year. And just the poverty, the segregation, There are communities in this city that are on life support. And, for them to be handing this money over to billionaires to subsidize billion-dollar, hugely profitable billion-dollar assets, and to just be rubber stamping it and not demanding community benefit deals is just deplorable. And it's salient. People on both sides of the so-called divide understand this. And, I think that a candidate can make hay by pointing to this issue especially. And as someone said on Twitter yesterday, tweeting about this recent deal for the Indians owner, Ohioans can have a little socialism as a treat, and that is socialism for the billionaire owners. They get their socialism.
Well, yeah, that's the same socialism that most states get, right?
Peter, this has been a breathtaking. Listen, man, I'm glad you reached out to me. This has been a breathtaking interview. We've gone over the 2-hour mark here. We may invite you back as a special insider to see what's going on the ground in the political future of this area, and more discussion of this intrigue. Because let me tell you, if you can inbox us or me any articles about that stadium deal, that's something that might have to go up in a Black Agenda Report piece that I'm going to have to write. And by the way, something else you told me that I want. Is it true that Cuyahoga County is the county in which Tamir Rice was shot by the police? Is that correct or incorrect?
That is correct. We are in Cuyahoga County is where the city of Cleveland sits. And Tamir Rice was gunned down about 5 minutes outside of downtown Cleveland. So
this is something that like that right after that, kind of tying back to like even Nina Turner and like how interesting, and I think it's just like kind of how bullshit it is that they're able to kind of frame her in some like radical position. She ended up working with Governor Kasich, which like no fan of anybody, even in the Democratic Party, let alone like the left. But just doing like her legislative duties, working with the commission, trying to do, like get some, police reform or whatever, doing whatever she can. Right. At the end of the day, like there's like a long history of Nina Turner as a legislator, just be able to work with literally everybody in the, the structure, and, for them to just be able to like flip this as like, oh, hey, radical, like, I don't know. It was kind of like mind blowing. But
what did the politics of that Tamir Rice have any implication, or could they have been exploited to give Nina Turner a better advantage?
Well, let me say this, because this is an interesting piece of political history here. Prior to Tamir Rice's execution by police officers, there was a reform movement in Cleveland, and specifically in the Cuyahoga County Democratic Party, that was notoriously corrupt. And the big name that you'll hear the big names that you'll hear in this corruption scandal were Jimmy DeMora and Frank Russo. Those folks got sent to prison because they were caught. There were all kinds of obvious kickbacks, and what it ended up being was DeMora and Russo were essentially made the scapegoats. Now, they were as guilty as anyone, but they weren't the ones that were piloting the ship, right? So they were thrown overboard, but the same captains were in charge. There was a reform effort that was somewhat successful, and it led to the election of a Cuyahoga County prosecutor named Tim McGinty, who was in some real respects not beholden to the corporate establishment here. He was more independent. He was far from perfect, as everybody soon saw with the Tamir Rice issue, but he was certainly not part of the same old corrupt, money beholden machine. He had some independence, he had some balls, he had some heart. But unfortunately, he did not prosecute the police officers who executed Tamir Rice. And that ended up being his undoing at the hands of the very corrupt establishment that previously had its hands on this county's machinery. So they were able to exploit McGinty's failure to prosecute those cops, even though these MFers, are we allowed to cuss on this podcast?
Yes. Yeah.
Am I allowed to motherfuck somebody? These motherfuckers would have never prosecuted those cops, but they pretended like they would have. They stayed behind the scenes and they just put one of their good old boys right back in there. And now we are seeing in Cuyahoga County a tightening of the old political order. The Cuyahoga County prosecutor is now prosecuting some Black Lives Matter protesters, get this, for felony assault for using a megaphone and hurting the ear of a wealthy business owner who is known to operate a racist establishment.
Are they using these? Are they able to do that because of laws passed by the Republican state legislature? I mean, I don't know about the case in Ohio, but
Thankfully, we're not there yet. Although I believe there is a very creepy dystopian bill being discussed on the House floor, and that there's going to be some movement on that in September, and hopefully it gets rejected. If not by the legislature, then by the courts as unconstitutional. So that Tamir Rice history is interesting, and it has definitely has given rise to the political grounds that we're on today when you see Nina versus Chantel, which again, hopefully we will be revisiting 1 year from now.
Inshallah.
Well, I want to bring in, we have a special surprise guest. He is here to settle an argument. There's only one thing he's here for. It's to settle an argument. Can you see him in the green room, Pascal?
No.
Good. He's going to settle the argument for us. And we're not done with this conversation. But he is here to settle this argument. He is a bit of a internet celebrity. You may know him as Labor Paul from Jacobin. We just know him as Paul Prescott, the teacher. Mr. Paul Prescott.
Prescott is here now.
What's going on? Although I did not come here to settle that debate. I know what you're talking about. I know exactly what you're going to say. It's still traumatic in my community, so I would not speak on that.
Paul, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this Nina Turner race.
Oh, that was the question that you brought me?
No, the question is, but I'm not going to get into that question. We're going to talk about Nina Turner right now.
Right. Okay, that's where we should stay.
That's where we should stay at. But we won't. But we should stay there now. So what are your thoughts on the Nina Turner race?
I mean, honestly, I haven't looked deeply into the numbers, but I mean, I was convinced by that Matt Karp article and just what I've been seeing. I mean, people like Pascal talked about. I mean, it was interesting. It seems like it was different than the Cori Bush race, where it seems like Cori Bush had some struggles with Black voters, but the story, of course, is not that Black voters rejected Nina Turner. The story is that, as we've just been talking about now, that these more affluent communities, mostly white communities, kind of put Chantel Brown over the edge. And this is something like Matt Carter has been talking about a while about, the new Democratic Party coalition and like what this new affluent base is doing and how this is really making things more complicated for the left. And, in general, I'm not someone, I believe very strongly we shouldn't sugarcoat things, and a defeat is a defeat, so we shouldn't spin this any other way. But I guess I would say it looks like this is a somewhat encouraging defeat in terms of how Nina made this a very serious race, and again, how she was able to win over so many working class Black voters. I feel like, this is a loss that's almost like a small advance in a way, because of how it seems like an improvement based on other people like Cori Bush, who again, the actual numbers show kind of struggled with Black voters. So
I'll say though, it is rare for politicians to be able to do what Cori Bush did and even go for that third, because her first race was nothing short of an ass whooping.
And we have to admit, Cori Bush went against, and I think we said this on another show, that she went against
establishment black political family.
Lacey Clay.
Right.
Lacey Clay, the Clay family. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Pascal.
Lacey Clay, black political class royalty. Listen, Paul letting us know he's got to go. So listen, everyone give a round of applause to Paul Patakis.
Peter
Peter Patakis. I'm sorry. Peter, Paul, and Mary. But Peter Patakis, brother, you have done a wonderful service to us in terms of bringing us the inside baseball on what was going on the ground. Keep in contact with us. I know we're connected on social media. We may have you in to do some analysis on other things, maybe civil rights cases relative to racial issues in Ohio or Cleveland or overall. You might become our civil rights attorney of record, if possible, to come and talk about those things, if you are willing to do so, Peter, in the long haul, if possible. And I appreciate you being a long-term fan of my work, who actually was familiar with me before the podcast. So
I would be honored, Pascal. Thank you very much. Call me anytime. Thanks, fellas. This was a great conversation.
Thank you, Peter.
OHI.
So let's get down to business.
Lacey Clay.
I'm not weighing in on this.
You were born in like what, 90?
You don't even know who these people are.
Right. Interesting fact. I was actually born the same day as the Rodney King beating, March 3rd, 1991.
Wow, that's how you came into this world.
God damn.
Yeah.
By the way,
Mike
Brown, friend of the show, said that Paul Prescott wrote a very good piece on Black Left Union and union organizing. Can we get the link for Paul's piece to share it with the chat? We always like to big up Black Left unions. What's up? Did you talk about drum? Did you talk about the Detroit Revolutionary Union movement? You left those one out. You left those out, didn't you, Paul?
Not in this article. This article is about Maida Springer, the great. She was kind of like a mentee of A. Philip Randolph. So she was a leader in the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. She also became one of the AFL-CIO's main representatives across Africa in the labor movement. So I think she's a really unsung hero, someone more people should know about.
What's the link, Paul?
Oh, I got to get the link? All right,
I think M2 Song's going to get the link.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, big up Paul. We got to promote Paul's work. Paul's doing big things.
So Paul's been gone for a minute, and a lot has happened since Paul's been gone. And you don't need to call your pop up for this one, Paul. It's totally fine to call pops up. I know you.
Right. We should do like a live call. I'm not calling my dad right now.
You should ask your father this question because I want to see his face when you when you ask him. I'm sure you fall right the hell out. Because unfortunately, you were born after these two gentlemen's careers were far.
Right. I'm of no help.
But Marcus was alive. He also wasn't very old. But Marcus, who is the greatest light-skinned R&B singer of our time? El DeBarge or Howard Hewitt?
Hewitt?
Marcus don't know any of these guys, man.
It's like it's multiple choice, so I got a 50%.
Exactly. I was still shitting myself probably when these.
Angela needs to be here because at least Angela was around in this time frame.
Marcus don't know any of these people.
112? Is that a choice? Let me tell you what I want to do.
First of all, the winner of the poll you put up, Jason, was my choice, which was El DeBarge. I hope you realize that. I looked at the poll.
The poll closed with El DeBarge.
Thank you. By tremendous amounts.
Actually, a shout out to X with the Lazy Bone. We were talking about Cleveland. We didn't bring up any Bone Thugs and Harmony though. So
Ohio for me is like we and Pascal talked about this. A lot of some funky motherfuckers come from Ohio.
Funk is Ohio. Funk music, man.
Brothers, the Ohio Players.
Yeah.
Who else is from Ohio?
There's a lot of funk bands from Ohio. As a matter of fact, there's a really good documentary unsung on funk in Ohio, man. Talk about, I think it's a documentary on the Ohio Players, one of my favorite funk bands. It was awesome.
I mean, Ohio is decent, but it's not the town.
Isn't Bootsy Collins from Ohio? Bootsy Collins is Ohio.
Yeah.
He's a Cincinnati guy.
Yeah, man.
Queen City.
Yeah.
But Paul, man, listen, you have anything you want to share with us in terms of your work, your writing, your politics, what's going on? What's the situation? Was you running for office? Are you still doing that? What's the word?
Well, we can talk on a different show about that. I mean, nothing more to report, really. I just came on to kick shit with you all. I wasn't prepared. I mean, I figured y'all would say something that I would
original plan
respond
was to have Paul on earlier. Because
I mean, I'm taking
privilege.
I'm a delegate at the DSA convention, which is all virtual, which is hell.
How's the DSA?
Yeah, that's
That's a loaded question.
What happened?
I mean,
get a call on the show. Please get a call on the show. I've emailed him. Pascal's emailed him. We never heard back. Akala, the rapper Akala. He's about.
Okay. You think I know it?
We can.
Hey, if Smith can hook it up, he can hook it up.
You hook it up, Smithy.
If I would love to hear about what's going on in the DSA conference at the moment, especially in terms of there's been a little bit of talk about like growing factionalism within the DSA and complaints about some groups against the leadership for directing energy towards electoralism too much. What are your thoughts? How's things going? Seems peace is.
Oh, look at this! Howard Hewitt is from Akron.
That's what I said.
Pascal, you are hating right now.
That's why I said Hewitt, AK Rowdy, Akron. I got it.
Yeah, you don't remember him and Nia Peoples was the most powerful interracial light-skinned couple of all time?
Because I went to Hewitt Middle School.
Paul, back to the DSA.
It's on a lunch break right now, so that's why I was late, and I'm just popping in now. So I mean, I can't get into all of it, but I mean, I think broadly, DSA in general is like, it's a lot of growing pains because, I joined DSA and I was active in I was active in the labor world, but also other socialist groups in the pre-Bernie days where if you had 40 people in a group, that was like extremely impressive those days. DSA grew insanely, like almost literally overnight. And I think a lot of people know this, but, I joined during the first Bernie campaign. There was very modest growth. And then it was like once Trump won, someone sent out an email to every person to join DSA. And it was just like this explosive growth. And so that's cool. But I think part of that too is like, you had so many people joining that, from many different backgrounds politically. And I think that's a strength and a weakness. Like, I think it's a good moment that so many new people are coming in, but, people have very different ideas of what they think socialism is, what they think we should be doing. A lot of people have just no experience at all. So working through that, I think is going to be pretty messy. I mean, there's a lot of dumb factionalism. I think it's one of those things where because that's the loudest, that's probably what you'll see the most, but there's also a lot of good stuff happening in different areas. It really is, DSA calls itself a big tent, and it really is. And I think there's a lot of strengths to that. There's a lot of weaknesses to that. I know I'm being kind of vague, but
I mean, are there any moves? Like, one of the things about DSA, which is probably an advantage in its growth, and I should probably say that I'm a member of DSA as well, and I believe
all of us on the screen are DSA. We may not be very active as much as Paul and Marcus, but I think we're all. Marcus, are you a DSA member? You're muted.
When I was still in Portland, I was like a whole lot more active, and then when I moved out to the sticks, and then I still just landed in Virginia, so I'll start.
Oh, we got to get that in a little bit, but yeah, let's let Gene finish.
So one of the advantages that it's a kind of very decentralized group with without a clear program, but also at some point that is a huge disadvantage because it's incoherent. Do you think there are any moves afoot to create at least a little bit more discipline on the DSA so we can actually function more coherently? Or do you think we're going to be seeing the same kind of incoherency moving forwards? Or is there an attempt to say, okay, DSA, if it wants to go to the next level of influence, we need to have some kind of discipline?
Yeah, I mean, there are moves to try to do that. And especially at the last convention in person in 2019, I mean, this actually kept coming up both in 2017, 2019 again. And I was someone that has been advocating for not necessarily democratic centralism per se, but more centralism, more coherence. Unfortunately, I mean, our side is losing out on that. And I don't always know what the reason is for this. There's, I think, a sentiment among a lot of members is like knee-jerk reaction against that in any sort of way. And again, that's where now it creates this picture of the organization where, you know, depending what chapter you're in, very, very different things can be going on. You know, I thought what was healthy in our 2017 convention was we adopted, I think it was 5 priorities, like priority policies. Like, you know, it wasn't to say, obviously, if you're in a chapter and you're working on something that's not those priorities, you can do that. But like, this is like the 5 things we were thinking about in this next period. I honestly forget all of them, but one of it was like building the labor movement, Medicare for all, things like that. I thought that was really good for the organization to do. And I think it's bad that we've moved away from that. I think at the last convention, it was like 10, a list of 10 or 15. I don't think we have the same thing at this convention. So yeah, I mean, I guess the short answer is like, I don't think that side is winning out in terms of trying to get more coherence. But I think what's sort of interesting to think about, I mean, DSA's growth, I mean, in honesty, has been very dependent on some outside events. So it's like we talk about, we had the Trump bump, we had the Bernie second run bump, there was an AOC bump in membership. So it's kind of interesting to think about, you know, these outside events, like how will DSA weather whatever is going to happen in these next few years. But again, you know, when people ask me about DSA, it's like, I really can't tell you one thing. Like some chapters are doing really incredible work. I'm biased, of course. I'm really proud of what we're doing in Philly. Like, I think broadly, there's this great opportunity for the left to merge with some parts of the labor movement. There's like so many opportunities. I think in Philly, we've done a really great job of doing that. And like, we closely work together with unions on common projects. So that's happening in some places. It's not, you know, it really is kind of depends what region, what chapter you're talking about.
What about organized working class people where they are, like going into black churches, union, you know, not only union halls,
right,
you know, gymnasiums, and organizing a working class black, brown, white people on the ground, even poor people on the ground, voter registration outreach, you know, community, you know, political education picnics, you know, whatever.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't think much of that is happening, and I think part of that the reason is because, you know, a lot of what you all talk about on this show, like this very unhealthy, hyper woke way of looking at black politics, which is not really looking at black politics, I think is still dominant among many people. And they have these tokenistic ideas, you know, whatever, about how to approach this stuff that I don't think is very productive. And I think leads away from doing the kind of things you are talking about. But, you know, again, it's patchy. I think there's progress in some areas, and I think increasingly in different elections on the local level, more of that is happening. But I guess not necessarily in a very broad way.
Yeah, man, I hear you. Listen, man, we've been on for 2 hours and 2.5 hours. We've covered 3 different subjects. And I have, we got to wrap some things up. I got to think.
Pascal needs a sandwich.
No, I have an obligation with some family members. I have to do some work with them to help them with some issues. My mom, particularly. So, I mean, if you guys want to carry on with me, fine. But I think we've. Don't forget, we want people to watch the videos. If they're too long, they can be.
That's not true. Our most watched videos 3.5 hours.
We got to push.
That's an anomaly.
That's not true.
I mean, I could do my best like Norman Finkelstein impression for like another hour or something.
Paul, you are the light. Pascal, you are the smart, loud.
We actually should bring him on to settle this question about the best light-skinned R&B singer.
I bet you he knows the full repertoire of both Howard Hewitt.
He's got the full catalog.
He might say some shit like Pavarotti.
I bet you any money that motherfucker's got the full Elder Barge catalog. Would you like to hear from his 3rd album? Lynn Hanson,
you got the Finkelstein voice down.
So yeah, Jason really does have the best Finkelstein impression out there.
And Paisan, New York City urban Italian.
Oh, we got to do on the bonus. Who was on that show? Was that Matt Bender?
Yeah.
We got to do the bonus half of what's that guy? Who's the mayor? No, the governor of New York was
Andrew
Cuomo.
Cuomo.
Yeah, Cuomo. Yeah.
Oh
Italians
God, that
not
guy.
having a good week. Italians are not having a good week. Did you see the Juventus soccer lady? Did you see the photo of the soccer lady from Juventus? Is it Juventus?
Juventus.
Yeah, I don't know. She wore one of the orange cones on her head, and
What's
then
an orange cone?
like little, like, you know, like the little orange,
Traffic
it's like a
cone.
little orange cone, but it's like they're only this tall, right? They don't come
Small
up high off
cone.
the ground. Yeah, she put it on her head, and then pulled her eyes. You know,
Who did
Yeah.
this?
this is like
Why?
a soccer player for a like a.
Oh, in
Why
the
did
Olympics.
I don't know why they did it. Juventus.
I can't remember
Anyway.
which one it is, but one of those Italian football teams is like a pro-fascist football
yeah.
team, and the other one is like in Europe, a lot of football teams are orientated towards like that. They have like subtle political affiliations. The like Tottenham in London is like the Jewish football team. The Turkish community supports Arsenal because of the colors are the same as Turkey. West Ham are like they're like the racist football team in Scotland. Celtic are the Catholic team. Rangers are the Protestant team. So we have all these kind of weird things, and it's the same is true in Europe with all these football teams.
Paul, are you famous enough in the podcast world that when you go out and about in Philadelphia, people stop you on the street?
I mean, a few times, but
Or did they confuse you for Drake?
damn,
Yeah, no more
damn. You know what's funny? Like my partner has a big crush on Drake, and increasingly I'm like, damn, that's why you're with me, right?
Yeah. The dollar store Drake. Here I am.
Damn.
Red Drake.
Wow.
Red Drake.
Red Drake.
We should get Drake on. I mean,
There's
but yeah, a few people will stop me. But I mean, it's obviously people that already are watching left media, you know? It's not like, and it's funny, people expect me to know everything that's going on in the left media world, like the drama and the beef. I'm like, yo, I have no idea what the fuck's going on. Like, I do my piece, I comment on This Is Revolution sometimes, you know, and then I don't know what's going on.
And then he's like, and that's what gets me fucked up.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of drama. There's always a lot of drama, but like, I don't know. That's just like part of it, right?
And it really is like,
No,
Marcus, do you get noticed in the street?
no, I don't. Like, that seems like I don't go anywhere. If I go, hoodie, mask up, everything. No one sees my face.
It's like a bad-
My brother gets recognized in the street.
He's a professional wrestler.
Yeah, but he's changed. You know, he apparently I heard this morning. He's changed his like professional wrestler persona from being a fake Mexican, because people used to come up to him in the street and they'd be like, they'd think he's Mexican, and they're like, oh, and he'd be like, no, I'm from Holland. It's like, oh, I thought you were Mexican for real. And then
What was it? What was the name?
his name is Dara Diablo. If you Google him, and then, but I don't know his new persona. I think he's kept the same name, but I think he's like he's a bad guy, so he's like a wife beater. Or
He's
something
being. People think you're joking. No, Gene's brother really is a professional wrestler. Like, this is not.
He should turn into like a really woke, politically correct character.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
He's like a Robin DiAngelo reader who just gets angry sometimes. You know, like.
Wait, let me send you a picture of him.
Yeah, he's like, it hurts me more than it hurts you every time he has to do a move.
Yeah, every time. Yeah, exactly. It's like
I recognize my privilege as a 400-pound muscular man as I'm pummeling you.
Yeah, my privilege to bench press 600 pounds 80 times.
Wait, I'm sending you a link. You can.
Gene's brother's one of those small guys that fly all over the place.
Yeah, he's very much in that mold. There you go. There's
Oh my god.
Oh, look, but he's hairy as a motherfucker.
I mean,
You could knit a very warm blanket with his chest hair.
I see the comment fragility Hulk. That's so funny.
Hold on, I'm going to share this with the screen so you guys can see how hairy Gene's brother is. God damn, Gene. If your brother shaved his back, you would fill up the whole vacuum.
You'd have a carpet.
Yes. Your brother.
Right, Gene, let's see it.
Originally, I was like, oh, you should totally go with the there was a time when having a pro Al Qaeda wrestler was like a big thing. I was like, you should go with the pro Al Qaeda thing, and your special move could be the Islam. And he was like, I don't think that's going to end well.
I think they had a professional wrestler named
the Iron Sheik. The Iron
Sheik.
That is Gene's brother. He was not lying. He is a professional wrestler, and he might be the hairiest man in the world.
Yeah, I've seen it.
A hair suit.
Now, Gene, can you just pull down the neck of the T-shirt a little bit? What do you?
We actually already had this discussion 2 days ago with Pascal.
Oh yeah, this shit is hereditary.
Oh yeah. Okay. All right.
Fragility Hulk. Love it.
The privilege pound or something.
Hey, you know why I give Gene's brother props though? Because he's bringing that shit back. Remember when Tom Selleck could be hairy as fuck, couldn't even see his nipples for that shit, with women all over the place? Because I'm hairy as shit too. Not like that. I'm not wildebeest bad, but I'm like extra taco meat bad. But he can't even zip up his coat without catching the hair.
I mean, it is kind of well groomed though. So.
Oh yeah, he kind of actually,
I feel like the zipper probably wouldn't get stuck. Actually,
my brother does kind of look like Zangief from.
Yes.
He got pomade, chest hair pomade, man. God damn. I hope he's watching this shit too.
I bet he's got some crazy ass stories. Can we get your brother on?
Yeah, you can get my brother on. He was. You should have him on Left Flank Vets. I hear the vets are all really into wrestling.
I mean, I feel like that there is a resurgence, or maybe I don't know, people who started liking wrestling just never got out of it. But it seems like there's a shit ton of people that are still I'm surprised it's still a thing. I thought
huge.
Wrestling is huge, bro.
I know. That's what I'm saying. Is when I grew out of it, I assumed that this would die.
I was kind of the same way.
After the NWO went away, I was like, okay, this thing's dead now. You can't rehash this.
Well, it's the nostalgia thing, isn't it? A lot of it, there's a lot of resurgence of 80s, 90s popular culture now. And wrestling is part of that. And wrestling is I mean, you should talk to my brother about this, about the way that wrestling functions as a business. It's super exploitative, and I always call it. It's like stripping, but for men, right? Because it's super exploitative. Because the big wrestling companies are really kind of abusive to people, and a lot of these wrestlers, they make money on the side. There's a phenomena called grapple gays, and grapple gays will pay a wrestler to choke them out for they'll give you $1,000 if you go over to them. My brother never does it, but I have a friend, one of my best friend's brothers is also a wrestler, used to be a wrestler, and people would say, I'll pay you $1,000 if you just choke me out in a wrestling match. So people are making money on the side, man, like that. It's maybe I'm giving away too much of the game, but yeah, wrestlers need to unionize big time. But the problem is there's always if you try to unionize, if you try and unionize the WWE, Vince McMahon can always find some other buff guy who can shout to take your place. So there's it's really tough. Unless you're a super huge star who's bigger, someone like The Rock, you don't actually have that much power in the wrestling.
And they'll just pivot you to movies. That's the whole thing about that. Once those guys start really talking about labor and rights, they just pivot you to movies. Okay, you know what? I'm calling your agent. Guess what? We got a whole new movie deal for you. $40 million film.
Yeah.
They didn't
I mean,
get into
like, yeah.
wrestling for the love of the game. You know, you got into wrestling because you're a big dude that wanted to be a star. I'm not saying you're a bad person. Let's just be honest about why cats get into wrestling.
I mean,
Maybe
The
you like
Rock,
falling on chairs.
The Rock is probably like the best success story coming out of wrestling, isn't he? Like,
No, because he comes from a family of humongously famous wrestlers. The pedigree is insane. It's like
but I mean, like, if you look at like a lot of the people who were like mega famous pro wrestlers,
Mhm.
most of them die young because their liver explodes, you know, when they're 50.
Yeah, Vince McMahon was like dishing out the steroids.
Vince McMahon got in a lot of trouble for giving everybody steroids and then getting called out after the open drug use, right?
And it's dangerous work. It's like yeah, it's not like they're like it's choreographed, but it's still extremely dangerous, and you can get super injured on it, and that's what happened. You know, it's like physically demanding, and you know.
Did Sting die from falling down from? Wasn't there a wrestler that died from just like coming out from the rafters or some shit?
I mean, again, you'd have to talk to my everybody on this TNL part is actually.
Someone says we should try to bring on Jesse Ventura. I'll be honest with you, I would be terrified to bring on Jesse Ventura.
We should try and we should do a wrestle show. We should definitely do a wrestle show.
I would.
Owen Hart.
I'm out for that one.
That's a big labor dispute to me, because those guys have been having labor issues since it started, and it's also a great monopoly show because Vince McMahon is the one that actually monopolized pro wrestling. He combined all the territories. That's what it was. It was very territorial.
Yeah.
He made it something global. And then you talk about the after effects of that. Keep in mind, Vince McMahon was so powerful. He started a football league.
Oh, yeah.
It's true.
You got to have a lot of money. Even if it failed, but that's a lot of money to be like,
Man, He Hate Me lives on though. That first, God, I will never forget that.
The proliferation of like YouTube and information technology and the relative cheapness of doing TV shows now means that there have been like some, like in the UK, they have their own like homegrown UK leagues that have that are on TV. There's not much money in it, but you know, everybody still wants to go to the WWE. I mean, because there used to be the WWC and the WWF, like there were two leagues, right? And then basically that ended. So, you know, they should put some antitrust on Vince McMahon, to be honest.
Never. And no one, when you talk about antitrust, Facebook, of course, Google, I get it. When you said like WWE, people just put their fingers in their ears.
Yeah, that's it. But they should do. And if people want to understand Donald Trump and him and his like political appeal, it's got a lot more to do with WWE than it has to do with like old school white power nationalism. You know what I mean? Like he basically played the same character that he played in the WWE, which was like a billionaire who was going to like give wrestling back to the people, as he played in like real politics. You know, like it was like the same character, just like one was,
which is so sad when you think about it, right? Because it's like you literally played the character that you played on the television, and people got so far behind it that they were willing to kill cats and riot at the Capitol. Like, that's insane.
Talk about postmodernism.
Some of these comments.
Free Pascal so he can help his man.
Hashtag free Pascal.
Look, if Pascal's mom was calling him right now, you are sadly mistaken if you thought he was telling his mother to hold on.
No, that wouldn't happen.
Pascal's a good son.
I think this is pretty much a group of people that don't tell their mother to hold on.
I got just scared just thinking about it.
Wow.
Call my mom right now and apologize.
Well, fuck, man. Thank you guys for joining us for this fun-filled. I enjoyed the discussion in the first half.
I thought the first half was dope. I thought the second half was dope. Then Paul came on. It was all downhill from there.
Oh,
That was just haterade. Paul, you my man. I have you, man. Paul is dope. I like Paul a lot.
You just hate Drake. It's all right. You hate Drake.
Paul is all right, man. Paul is good, man.
I would say, Pascal, I finally watched that video you on Brianna Joy Gray's show about black politics. Every time you open your mouth, it was fire. Seriously.
Oh, I appreciate that, brother. I appreciate that. I've been an admirer.
Someone else on there, man. I didn't understand what the fuck he was saying. But, I won't name names, but one of the three guests.
Paul, would you be willing to talk a little bit more about the DSA convention when everything's, kind of all said and done, and you can at least just of like, hey, this is kind of what had happened. Like, no one's interested in the drama here.
Right. Possibly. I mean, honestly, it's a lot of boring, tedious, like procedural shit.
Yeah, I'm just
towards
the by the end, like they don't really vote towards like, oh, hey, we're doing this,
right,
measure to focus on this or try and accomplish this in the next year. So kind of, just talk through,
right,
what they get done. But if they got anything done, who knows? Progressive stack got reshuffled. I don't know.
So people are in the chat, who is the picture in the background, and that is a picture of Brooke Shields. We were doing a show on privilege.
The greatest light-skinned singer.
We were doing a show on privilege, right? And if white privilege had a face, I think it would be Brooke Shields in the early 80s. So this is a very young Brooke Shields behind us too, by the way. I think she's like under 18. Modeling Calvin Klein jeans. So thank you guys. Thank you, Stefan, for coming on.
Also, Peter Patacasio.
Thank you, Paul, for showing up. I wish we could have asked you earlier. I would have loved to hear what you hear your comments on the privilege debate.
Next time.
Marcus, I would have loved to have heard your comments on the privilege debate, but I understand you're relocating to a whole different world.
Yeah. I got to work on the lighting. There's too much shadows going on.
Is there more black people in your neighborhood now?
Oh, hell, man. I'm in like North Virginia. Like, man, getting the cable, the internet dude come in. It's like, stop. What the fuck is up, man? I'm happy to see you.
Paul is like, man, I live in Philly.
He's like,
Philly's like the blackest city in North America.
It's black city. Like Oakland thinks it's black, and then I went to Philly. I was like, oh shit, this is how Oakland used to look. There was moments I was walking around West Philadelphia, and it really did feel like, because you guys have to train to.
Oh yeah, right there.
So I was just like, damn, I could seriously be in East Oakland right now, in West Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. The only thing that gets me is when cats talk. Y'all say water.
Right. Water.
That's the only thing. I was like, man, I really enjoy Philadelphia. I really do.
It is the best city in the world.
I don't know about that.
Cheesesteaks, though, they're not that good.
That is an overhyped thing, the cheesesteaks. Like, whatever, man. Anyone can make.
That's why I like Paul. He gives it to you straight. He's not going to give you a hype, no bullshit. Like they're just okay.
I won't hype it up, but Philly is the greatest city in the world to ever exist. But I'm not really going to hype it up.
Now Paul got hip hop beats with Pascal, because Pascal is like, it's Queens, brother.
Feeling the beat.
Look, Pascal's moving. He's like, all right, I'm going to get the fuck out of here now. Like, come on. Like, my mom is in trouble. This is gonna go.
Y'all is fucked up saying his mama was calling. You know how I know that wasn't true? Because when his mom called, just like when my mom called, hey man, I gotta go. My mom's calling. All right, y'all. Thank you, chat. Thank you for all the super chats today. It was great. Thank you, M. Toussaint, for moderating this. I'm not used to the chat being so filled with like over the top, foolish, racist people. So thank you guys, and watch some cartoons.